is going on, everybody? Welcome into a special free agent edition video here today. Going to be going team by team through the entire AFC conference. I'll be doing the NFC tomorrow, but going to be going through team by team, move by move, basically a comprehensive discussion about all the moves every team has made and what I think about them, and actually giving out grades for every team through a week of free agency so far. Just a few notes, though, on our overall discussion here today. First of which is that I'm not going to be getting too far into the weeds on all of the details of all these different contracts. I'm anticipating if I say a guy was overpaid or I wouldn't have given him that much money, or just saying a guy got this much money, I'm anticipating some comments saying, well, it wasn't actually that much money, right? Like, they can get out of it after the third year. There's void years. Like, yes, I'm well aware that there's like a lot of fake money on these contracts. Most of these deals do have quote unquote outs after a couple of years. There's, all of it. I'm well aware of it. I'm generally aware with all these deals what the implications are, when they can get out of it, and all that stuff. I'm trying to cover the whole league here. Not going to get super into the weeds on all of the contract details. Plus, I have like a little mini take here. I think we as a football community have gone a little bit too far in the direction of just calling stuff fake money or saying the team has an out after certain amounts of years. Like, yes, you can still cut a guy and, not have to pay him the entire amount of money, but just because you cut a guy and then take a $12 million dead cap hit and that's the potential out, it doesn't mean it's fake money. Like, that money still goes against your cap. So I think we've gone a little bit too far in just saying some of these deals are, just 1 year contracts with a bunch of team options on them. Like, that's not really the full honest truth on it as well. But anyway, just kind of getting ahead of it on some of that, because I can definitely anticipate some comments being like, you don't understand the details here. You said it's an overpay, but they can get out of it after a year. Anyway, you get the point. Just wanted to get that out of the way now. Second of all, the other thing I wanted to get out of the way with this discussion is I'm going to be listing through all of the moves that every team made, and then I'm going to kind of get into my thoughts and opinions on those moves. So as I get into the kind of opinion pieces on this, if I don't revisit a certain move or give you a take on a certain move, it's very safe to assume that I just don't have a strong opinion on the matter, and that I think it's a fair play type of contract. Value's fine, needs fine, like solid move is very likely my opinion on it. If I think something's a bad move or a great move, I'm going to talk about it. So there might be a couple players that you leave wanting me to hear a little bit more on. You can very much assume that I think it was a solid signing, and I don't have too much to say about it beyond that. And then the last thing here, I am going to be giving grades for every team and how they've done so far. Couple points there. Number one, this is just a week through this thing, so someone could go out, trade for Trey Hendrickson or do some other stuff, and those grades could change. I don't want you guys to take these grades too seriously. It's more of just kind of a vibes check from me. Picture it, my thumbs up or thumbs down. An A grade would be a huge thumbs up. A B grade is like thumb leaning up. C is like, okay, whatever. Anything below that is, thumbs down. I'm not loving what you're doing. So I did want to put grades on it because everybody loves grades. But just, maybe don't nitpick the grades too much here. Anyway, wanted to get those 3 points out of the way before we get started. And now let's begin by talking about the New England Patriots. We're going to start in the AFC East and work clockwise, finishing with the AFC North. So again, how I'm going to do this, I'm going to read through position by position, kind of what the big moves were, and then I'm going to get into more of my talking points on those moves. So I wanted to start with the Patriots defense because that is where they did spend most of this money that they had to play with. On the defensive line, they make the big splash for Milton Williams, who I do believe is the highest paid free agent of this cycle, outside of maybe Geno Smith, if you count that trade and extension that is coming. That'll probably have a larger number. Sam Darnold might have had a larger number as well. But non-quarterback, Milton Williams, the biggest free agent signing. They bring in Harold Landry before free agency officially begins because he was cut by the Titans. 3 years, $43 million. Couple of cheap one-year deals as well. Kayvon Chason from the Raiders and Khyiris Tonga at defensive tackle. So some big moves at D-line. They also traded away. I forgot to put this in my notes, but his name is...
3 hours later.
Oh, I really thought I was going to be able to recall it. Had to look it up. Devon Godshaw, defensive tackle heading to New Orleans. But big moves on the D-line. At linebacker, they get Robert Spillane, 3 years, $33 million from the Raiders. At cornerback, they get Carlton Davis, 3 years, $54 million. And at safety, Marcus Epps brought in on a 1 year, $4.4 million contract. And then on the offense, much more quiet up to this point, but they signed Mac Hollins to come in and compete at wide receiver, and they bring Austin Hooper back on a 1 year, $5 million deal. And then on the offensive line, they release David Andrews, longtime center for them, sign Morgan Moses, the right tackle, to a 3 year, $24 million contract, and then they add interior offensive lineman Wes Schweitzer on a 1 year deal. So very busy for our first team here. I just love what the Patriots did with this defense especially. And that's even though I would ding them for what they paid Harold Landry. We'll talk about that in a second. But beyond that, you bring in Milton Williams to really give them one of the best interior defensive line pass rushes in the league. You got Milton Williams. You've got hopefully Christian Barmore coming back full go next year. We'll see. But he's a guy that's already become kind of a forgotten man around the NFL because he had a blood clot situation that kept him off the field for the majority of last season. I want to say he came back late. God, those Patriots games were hard to watch at the end of the season, but I want to say he did get back on the field very late in the season. But you put Milton Williams with Barmore and Keon White, who does his best work rushing over guards as more of an interior rusher. Those three guys will get their one-on-ones with, all three really, probably a lot of odd fronts here on rushing downs where all these guys are getting one man, you're getting single teams, getting to go to work, and that was a big thing that Milton Williams was able to take advantage of in Philadelphia with Jalen Carter next to him. So I love that Milton Williams piece, not just to ramp up the talent and add another star player to that defensive line, but what he's going to do to open up opportunities for himself and everybody else, given that they really do have three impact interior rushers. And then, you go to the edge, not quite as exciting, right? They bring in Harold Landry to a pretty substantial deal, 3 years, $43 million, 27 guaranteed on that bad boy. That was before free agency ever began. This is Mike Vrabel's guy. He worked with him in Tennessee. Unfortunately, I don't know that Mike Vrabel realizes that Harold Landry just is not the same player that he got to coach 2 years ago in Tennessee. He has since had a torn ACL, could be an Achilles, but, a leg injury, and just has not been the same since. And I tweeted this out as he signed with the Patriots that he was dead last in pass rush win rate last year. He had a pressure rate of 7%, which is well below the 10% threshold that you look for in an edge rusher that should even be on the field. Like, if you're below 10%, you are not really doing your job, and that's where he was at. He's a guy that has always leaned on athletic traits and doesn't have them to work with anymore. So that signing was them, to me, just getting a guy that Vrabel's familiar with and throwing money around to throw money around. He's still an adequate run defender, if not an above-average run defender, but I don't think you need to pay damn near $15 million a year for that player. I think wait it out, see if somebody pays him. If they do, fine, you can pivot. I think if you waited it out, you probably don't have to pay him half of what they did. Or if you miss out, fine. Go get a Preston Smith or something like that, someone else that can do that run defense stuff for a lot cheaper. So that's my big criticism of the Patriots, is going to get Harold Landry. But you start to put him in here now with those three interior pieces. I like the Kayvon Chason signing, 1 year, $5 million, former first-round pick for the Jaguars, ended up with the Raiders last season and really showed kind of why he was a first-round pick. I'm putting that in brackets for the audio-only people listening to this via the Fully Inflated Football podcast, which is an option, you guys. Make sure you're subscribed to my podcast if you're not. But anyway, Chason, super athletic guy, but never really was able to rush the passer, was a bust for the Jaguars. The Raiders picked him up for nothing, and out of nowhere, something clicked. He was breaking out a cross chop. He was rushing with some speed to power, winning with a bull rush. He was an efficient player when he got on the field for the Raiders last year. Just 25, maybe going on 26 years old, someone that still has potential. Would not be surprised if he ends up their best true edge rusher. I don't think that's crazy to say with what I said about Harold Landry. You know, they have Anthony Jennings on the roster, which is another reason I don't love the Harold Landry signing, because Jennings is one of the best early down run defending edge players in the league. Keon White is a hybrid guy. He's, if you were to call him an edge player, he would be their best edge player. But you get the point. Like, I think that Chason on a 1-year prove-it deal for what he showed last year is a really nice, just smart signing. If it doesn't work out, you know, sorry I overhyped it a little bit, but, you know, you don't have to expect too much from that. But I do think it's a smart signing. And then Kyrus Tonga as well. Hey, if you're going to trade away Godshaw, I like going to get Kyrus Tonga, who's a bigger-bodied nose tackle that no one's really truly ever believed in him, but his grading profile has been good as he's bounced around from Chicago to Minnesota to Arizona. He's been all over the block. I think that's another smart signing. So I think the Patriots' defensive line, even if they still have room to maybe take their second-round pick and go get a Donovan Ezeraku or a Nick Scorton or something like that, you know, we'll see how the draft plays out, but they still have room to add another edge piece here. Maybe they'll be in play for Trey Hendrickson, but this D-line is at least playable compared to what they had working with last season, especially after, you know, Barmore went down and they traded away Judon. So I think that's a great start, but that's just the beginning of what I love about what they did with this free agency. Getting Robert Spillane from the Raiders, 3 years, $33 million. That's a great price for what he's done for the Raiders the last 2 years. Patrick Graham's system, by the way, stems from the Belichick tree, just as Mike Vrabel's does. So I think a lot of the terminology, if we're talking about a middle linebacker coming in, being able to kind of be the captain of the defense, wear that green dot, I'm assuming it's going to be him and not Jawan Bentley, but we'll see how that all plays out. But I love that signing. He's a great 3-down linebacker. He's earned the status of being called a great 3-down linebacker with what he's done the last 2 years, really 2 kind of Pro Bowl caliber seasons there. So I think at that price, that's excellent. And then you go to the secondary, man, you put Carlton Davis now in the mix with this young secondary that is shaping up to be one of the best in the league, especially at cornerback with Christian Gonzalez, who proved to be a superstar in the making last year. Really hope Marcus Jones can stay healthy in the nickel. I like him a lot. But obviously they needed somebody else to complete that group of corners. They just didn't really have anybody else after Jonathan Jones hits the market here. So I love going to get Carlton Davis. You now have one of the best cornerback duos in the league. And then even at safety, you know, they're counting on hopefully getting Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar kind of re-implemented here. It was a bad year for both those guys. Duggar played through injury. Jabril Peppers, major off-the-field drama. We'll see what happens with Jabril Peppers there. But I like the Marcus Epps signing. 1 year, $4.4 million. They're just taken from that Raiders defense with Chason, Epps, Spillane. I think it's smart process. So I just think this Patriots defense under Vrabel has a real chance at being something like a top 10 to 15 defense right away. I think you can make an argument after what they've done in free agency that this is the most talented defense Vrabel has ever worked with. Not to take a shot at those rosters in Tennessee, but he had some very average rosters in Tennessee and got them to play like top 10 defenses. I think this roster is better than what he had in Tennessee. I really do, especially if they could find a way to get one more edge rusher in the mix there, maybe through the draft, in a very deep edge class, by the way. Now, offensively, they were much more quiet, really just bringing in Matt Collins, another kind of thumper at wide receiver. I don't hate it. It was a cheap deal. It's a good special teamer. Gives them a little bit more size in that wide receiver room that they didn't have. Probably not going to be a starter for them, but I like bringing him in for the price they got him. You bring an Austin Hooper back, who, if they want to be in 12 personnel, he was good for them last year. But obviously they are shaping up, I think, to take a playmaker at pick 4. If it's Travis Hunter, great. If not, I think this, and throughout today's show, something I'm going to be trying to talk about is what does this team's free agent moves say about where they could go in the draft? I think the Patriots, this screams wide receiver. So to me, it's either Travis Hunter, if he's there at 4, if the Browns take Shedeur Sanders, 2 quarterbacks go and they get a chance maybe to take a Travis Hunter, I think they would do that. Or Tet McMillan had a great pro day today. I think him at 4 feels very close to a lock. So to me, that's the pick at number 4 is wide receiver. And then on the offensive line, they do still need a left tackle as well, but I don't think that player is coming with the 4th pick in the draft. I just don't. But I do like the Morgan Moses signing to get another player in there, and it upgrades 2 positions because Mike Onwenu is an okay tackle, but a really great guard. And they really don't want to play him at tackle. I think they like him at guard mostly. So you bring in Morgan Moses at 3 years, $24 million. I just don't understand why Morgan Moses hasn't made more money throughout his career. Teams always toss him to the side. He always gets less than he's worth, and he always just plays like a top 10 right tackle. And I think getting that, just as it's been a great move for the Ravens when they did it, it was a great move for the Jets last year, great move for the Patriots. I have no reason to believe otherwise. So I love getting him. You now got Onwenu at right guard. It seems there's a theme with this team, by the way, of guys hopefully coming back healthy next year. Cole Strange, who essentially missed the entire season, former first-round pick. They're hoping he can really come along at center. And then they're going to have a competition at left guard with their young guys. Left tackle's the big question mark for the Patriots with Vidarian Lowe there right now. So, I know I mentioned them drafting an edge rusher potentially, but I do think with that 2nd-round pick that they have, if a tackle is there, that could absolutely be in play as well. But definitely less quiet or more quiet with the offensive spending, which makes sense because there's a lot more defensive players out there that are worth spending on compared to giving Dan Moore $80 million or something like that. So you gotta play the market. Seems to me they're going free agency for defense and probably draft for offense, which I just love the process. Ultimately, my grade for the New England Patriots, I gave them an A-, which is actually going to be one of the highest grades we give here today. And really would have been an A if they didn't overpay Harold Landry. Just being critical about it. But I love what they did. I think it's going to be a great defense, and it opens up clarity in terms of the draft, especially at number 4. Go get a playmaker, and this roster's coming around. All right, let's move on to the New York Jets. So a summary of their moves at quarterback. They bring in Justin Fields for a 2-year, $40 million deal that is more of a 1-year deal. But on the offensive line, they lose the aforementioned Morgan Moses and bring in Josh Myers and Chukwuma Okorafor, a little offensive tackle swap there between the Jets and the Patriots. They don't do much with their playmakers, but they do bring in tight end Stone Smart on a cheap 1-year deal over from the Chargers. Then on defense, they lose Javon Kinlaw to the Commanders and bring in a couple of players, Derek Nadi from the Chiefs and Byron Cowart for pretty cheap deals. At linebacker, they release veteran Emmanuel Mosley and extend Jamien Sherwood, who had a bit of a breakout season last year. 3-year, $45 million re-signing of Jamien Sherwood. That is starter money for him, well earned. And then in the secondary, they lose DJ Reed and bring him and replace him by signing Brandon Stevens to a 3-year, $36 million deal. They also signed safety Andre Sisco from the Jaguars to start for them on a 1-year, $10 million deal. So let's start with the Justin Fields signing for the Jets. You guys know, if you've been around the channel, I'm not a big Justin Fields endorser, if you will. Had issues with his processing coming out of Ohio State. They haven't developed in the league, and I don't anticipate that they will develop at this point moving forward. But that said, over the last couple of years, my opinion on Fields has been rather stagnant in the sense that he is somewhere around a top 32 quarterback in the league. He brings a very high floor with his running ability. I don't think we have really seen a team truly tap into that running skill and just build a read option, play action oriented offense. Think back to like those early Lamar Jackson days. I think if you did something like that with Fields, you could get a even higher floor from him as a quarterback. Even if, as we know from those old Greg Roman offenses, the ceiling is less exciting in terms of opening up the passing game. But I don't think anyone's really fully leaned into that type of stuff with Fields quite yet. I think the Jets could maybe be doing that. But I don't really view Fields as this, what if quarterback, this theoretically high upside signing. I actually think this is very close to the Gardner Minshew contract last year for the Raiders, which was, a 2-year, $30 million contract. So a little bit of league inflation there, plus a little bit of the draft pedigree and this idea that Fields still has upside. There's a little bit of inflation for that. So it's a 2-year, $40 million deal. But Minshew, again, a theoretically high floor bridge quarterback signing. That is where Justin Fields is at in my mind. And to me, that's what this contract says. For me, this is, look, we know he's a hard worker. The players have always liked Justin Fields, right? So you bring him in, the fans are going to enjoy watching him play during this transition season. Like, no player has had a fan hype machine like Justin Fields. So you will suck the Jets fans in to at least enjoy watching him play for a year while you run the ball, you hopefully build a great defense, and you continue to look for your quarterback of the future. So to me, that's what this deal is. And maybe if there's a 5% chance that something does click with him as a passer, great. That theoretical ceiling is still in there in terms of his physical traits. Yes. So the signing does make sense. It's a little more than I would prefer to pay Justin Fields, but for where the Jets are at, I really don't hate that move all that much. I think a lot of people were probably expecting me to come in here and dunk on the Jets. It's an admission of where you are and, trying to do this kind of competitive rebuild thing because the Jets do have a pretty good roster to kind of raise the floor here. So I don't entirely hate it. I would just say if you're still one of those people believing Justin Fields is going to emerge as this star quarterback, don't count on it. That's all I'm going to say. Don't count on it. Now, the one thing that stood out to me that the Jets did that I really don't like is losing DJ Reed to then pay Brandon Stevens pretty similar money. DJ Reed got, I think, 15, maybe 16 mil a year from Detroit, and Brandon Stevens gets 12 million. Now, maybe DJ Reed just wanted out. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I like to think that Aaron Glenn could appeal to DJ Reed to say, hey, look, we're going to have an awesome defense next year. You're a missing piece, which he kind of is. So I don't like losing DJ Reed, especially if Brandon Stevens is the guy you're going to go for there. If you want to say we want to get younger and, this is a multi-year rebuild, we don't really want a 29-year-old corner out there, I actually understand that. But to then go get Brandon Stevens, who, first of all, was just horrible last year. Absolutely horrible. But he's got to be 20... He's 27. He turns 28 at the end of the year. You just gave him a 3-year deal. Again, we're assuming you can get out of that after a year and a half or so. But I just don't like that signing. I don't think it makes sense in terms of, again, letting DJ Reed to then go to then sign Brandon Stevens. I would much rather they say, well, okay, if we're going to let DJ Reed go, let's draft a guy or let's give an opportunity to someone like, oh man, is he not on the team anymore? The Canadian, oh yeah, there he is. Quintez Stiggers. Sorry, I was pulling up their depth chart and couldn't see him. Stiggers, 5th round pick out of the Canadian League. Interesting pick. I'd much rather give him the path to playing time than go to Brandon Stephens, who teams couldn't wait to throw the football at last year. Ravens fans celebrated when they found out he's not back. I don't think this is some like high upside signing. I think this is a guy that had one flash season in a perfect situation in that 2023 Ravens defense. 2024, the pass rush got worse. Mike McDonald leaves. Brandon Stephens shows you who he is. I don't even think he's that great of a scheme fit for them. I mean, theoretically, he's taller and longer and faster. Maybe he could be better playing more press man. I would love to see it, but I certainly hasn't been in his pro tape. So that was one that I was just like, I don't like that one bit. I would much rather save that money for future spending, because even if you're saying, yeah, we can get out of this after year one or after year two, there's still something in the NFL called rollover cap. Whatever money you don't use rolls over to the next year, all of it. So, like, the Jets might have some stuff go right and they get in a spot where they want to spend some more money next offseason. Even if you're cutting Brandon Stephens and saving cap space, there would inevitably also be dead cap on Stephens for next season as well, though, if you do cut him. You're talking about that's probably a $15 million difference in cap spending for next season between the potential rollover if you were to just save that money and signing him. So that one I really did not like was going to get Stephens. On the other hand, I do love the one-year prove-it deal for Andre Cisco. I don't fully understand the Jags letting him go at that price. I feel like Cisco's one of these young safeties kind of figuring things out. He's a playmaker on the back end. He's a heavy hitter. I really like how he fits in that defense next to Tony Adams. I feel like that kind of solved their safety problems and has a chance to get big earnings here in this defense. Reminds me, as a player, a lot of Kirby Joseph in terms of overall skill set. So I do like that signing. Going into this Aaron Glenn defense, look for him to have a big year potentially. But beyond that, the Stone Smart flyer is fun. I like him for 12 personnel. He's an athletic tight end that showed some good stuff for the Chargers. So see if they can, if they are going to be one of these run-heavy teams that wants to run a lot of 12 personnel with Justin Fields, kind of a lot of that Greg Roman influence. Stone Smart would make sense as a kind of a wing player to be a heavy package player. So I like that pairing with the Field signing. And then some of those D-line signings weren't bad. I definitely agree with not paying Javon Kinlaw what the Commanders did. We'll talk about that tomorrow when we do the NFC episode. But the Jets really needed some run stoppers on the defensive line. Their run defense was putrid last season. And I think Derek Noddy, Byron Cowart, for what they paid him, pretty solid little moves to add some more depth and talent to that defensive line. So, for the Jets, I gave them a B- grade at the end of the day, being pretty critical of the DJ Reed move, being one of the big things they did, losing him and bringing in Brandon Stephens, and also losing Morgan Moses, by the way, at that price point. If I were the Jets, I just don't think this roster is that far away. They have to restore the culture and find a quarterback, hopefully with a deep quarterback class next season. You never know what happens in free agency. And hell, maybe that 5% chance that Justin Fields hits does happen. But I would have liked to bring Morgan Moses and DJ Reed back as you look to restore this culture. So I don't love losing those guys. Ultimately, I'm going with a B- grade on the Jets, which again is like thumb trending upwards. Solid job, nothing crazy is kind of where we're at with that grade. Okay, the Miami Dolphins up next. So a summary of their moves here. They, at quarterback, bring in Zach Wilson on a one-year, $6 million deal. Excited to talk about that. Just a couple moves with their wide receiver group / tight end group. They signed Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, a big slot wide receiver over from the Titans, on a 2-year, $6.5 million contract. Very good value there. They also add Dwayne Eskridge, presumably as a punt returner. At running back, they cut Raheem Mostert and bring in Alexander Mattison from the Raiders. On the offensive line, they are set to release Teron Armstead. Something to keep an eye on there. They restructured it, and the notes on Spotrac was like with the intention of a post-June 1st release. But it wasn't that they designated him for a post-June 1st release. So that's going to be a situation to keep an eye on, is what the Dolphins are doing with Armstead. If he is released, that's something to keep an eye on for like the New England Patriots. Could that be a big left tackle signing for them that could complete their offseason? But that's going to be a big domino to fall later in the offseason, it seems. But they did bring in some interior offensive line help. Thank God. James Daniels over from the Steelers on a 3-year, $24 million contract. Daniels coming off of a season-ending leg injury last year. Beyond that, defensive line, not a whole lot of movement going on. At linebacker, they did extend Terrell Dodson to a 2-year, $8 million contract. And KJ Britt, a name we haven't heard in a long time, but KJ Britt is going to give it another go. I don't know if he had ever officially retired or not, but a legendary member of the Legion of Boom is going to sign here and give it a go. And then in the defensive back group, they have yet to re-sign Kendall Fuller. They lost Javon Holland, obviously. Jordan Poyer out, so potentially new look secondary here as they get some cheap 1-year signings on Afetu Melifanu and Ashton Davis back in the safety group. So let's start with the Zach Wilson signing. I tweeted out that I have some thoughts about some potentially dangerous Zach Wilson takes. I'm going to be a little bit more reserved there, but I do think this is the perfect signing for the Dolphins to make. I really do. We've talked a lot in the last 4 or 5 months about, the era of the resurgent quarterback prospect. Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. We've seen this run of quarterbacks that didn't necessarily land in the right spot or, busted, but through years and years of NFL coaching and just sticking with it and figuring things out, getting better and becoming starting caliber quarterbacks into their late 20s, in Geno's case, into his early 30s. The next question after having that conversation was, who's the next guy to be that player? And to me, Zach Wilson was like the no-brainer. It's him. 2 of those 3 names we mentioned were quarterbacks that the Jets screwed over, Geno Smith and Sam Darnold. Just a horrible starting point for Zach Wilson. And he's got the traits. He's got a ton of talent. He's got playmaking ability. Now, I'm not going to sit here and defend his tape and act like he's been this great player. I wouldn't have really done the same thing for Sam Darnold either, but I always said, I still kind of believe in Sam Darnold, and that ended up paying off for me. So I'm just saying, this is a good deal for the Dolphins. 1 year, $6 million for a team that you have to be realistic about this Tua situation. It's a sensitive subject. I understand it, but the reality of the situation is if this poor guy gets another concussion, you have to imagine that's going to be it. People were saying he has to consider that in the last one. And beyond the concussion stuff, he's a guy that gets banged up and has injuries elsewhere. So to me, this is a great deal. Zach Wilson has an opportunity potentially to come in, get some starting reps in an offense that it's just going to be very similar to what Sam Darnold had in Minnesota, where it's like, trust the system, play action, turn your head around, trust that the throw is going to be there to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And there's a chance that Zach Wilson plays very well in this situation. And look, if he plays super well, then we can have some even further conversations about if you go further with him or with Tua. But there is a world where, okay, what if Tua does get another concussion and has to retire? I know it's a sensitive subject to even bring that up, but how can you not admit that that's a realistic situation? If it's week 5 and Tua has to have a medically forced retirement, Zach Wilson at least gives you a chance to maybe save your season and even emerge as someone that you can fall right back on as a franchise quarterback. Now, I know those are big words. Save the season, franchise quarterback. We're talking about Zach Wilson here. We're talking about a 1 year, $6 million free agent signing being the perfect idea for the Dolphins here. So I really like that move. Beyond that, I think the Nick Westbrook-Akine signing is, and I'll talk about this, pairing it with the Alexander Mattison signing and the James Daniels signing. It's an admission of becoming more physical offensively. Nick Westbrook-Akine is the opposite of some of these other wide receiver 3 types that they've tried to invest in, right? Odell Beckham, Cedric Wilson, Even you could even argue Malik Washington, their draft pick last year. Taj, I'm pulling up their depth chart. They drafted the undersized speed receiver. Yeah, another Washington, Taj Washington out of USC. Like, this is always the team that they just want to fill out that room with as much speed as possible. And actually, they don't need a third speed threat at wide receiver. They already have the fastest wide receiver duo to funnel targets to. They need a no-nonsense chain mover that'll run block, be in the right place in the right time, do a little bit after the catch, be a bigger-bodied red zone threat if you need it. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is literally the perfect wide receiver 3 for them that they've just avoided. I mean, they always would make these splashy speed signings and then resort to going with, oh my gosh, I need to give a proper shout out, but I can't think of his name at this very second. I gotta find it. Dolphins fans know who I'm talking about here. Bear with me here. We're going to get it. River Craycraft. That's who we're thinking of. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is just a bigger, stronger, more useful impact player in that position. So I really like that signing, and super cheap. 2 years, $6.5 million. And you talk about the Dolphins' run game as well, really predicated on tosses and getting to the outside. Having a crackback block from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Geez, say that 5 times fast. Crackback block from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but having that in that offense, it's going to be fantastic with Aaron Brewer at center as a lead blocker and all this. So I really, really like that. But again, this admission of trying to become a more physical football team that we've been praying for from the Dolphins for so long. They go and get the guard, James Daniels. Hopefully he's healthy. That's the risk attached to this. But if he is healthy, that's, 3 or $24 million for a guy that was playing at a Pro Bowl level for the first time in more of a move blocking system in Arthur Smith's offense. He's a great athlete. He's a great fit for what the Dolphins need at that guard spot. So I really like that signing if he's healthy. And then Alexander Madison's an awesome signing because they have now moved on from Mostert. They have their speed players, right? They have Achane. They have Jalen Wright from Tennessee. But if they have to have a 3rd and 1 now, you bring in Alexander Madison, who runs tough as shit. He's a full-size back, and he actually played pretty well for the Raiders last year. So I think those 3 signings as value signings for a team that really didn't have any free agent money is a good step in the right direction for the Dolphins. Kind of admitting, like, look, everything we do doesn't have to be centered around speed. You do need blocking and physicality to open things up for the speed. And when you get into cold weather football, it can't always be speed. So I really like those value moves for their offense. And then defensively, look, I don't like the way that they had to lose Javon Holland. I feel like you don't see this very often where a team loses superstar defensive players for nothing in back-to-back seasons. And that happened with Christian Wilkins, and it happened with Javon Holland here. So I don't love losing Holland and not finding a way to work that out. But that said, like, I do like the 2 safety signings they did make. Ifeatu Melifonwu, for 1 year, $3.5 million, is a really nice move. He was a guy that obviously didn't have a huge opportunity to be a full-time starter in Detroit. They've had a lot of bodies there throughout his time there, and last year he was injured, but he's made a lot of plays. I've been impressed by what he's done and the opportunities he's gotten in Detroit, and he's a former corner. I love him kind of making that transition to a system that likes to run a lot of quarters, assignments, and stuff, where he can flip his hips and cover like a corner at times. And I think he's going to be a pretty good player for the Dolphins and potentially earn a contract here. Really cheap deal. Really like that one. And then Ashton Davis as well, interdivision signing here. He's someone that the last 2 years for the Jets, when he's gotten on the field, he's made plays and looked the part. I really liked Ashton Davis coming out. He had a lot of issues with tackling consistency early on in his career as a 3rd-round pick out of Cal. But the metrics show that he's cleaned up the tackling, and I wanted to see him get a starting opportunity somewhere, whether that was with the Jets or someone else. I would not be the least bit surprised. Now, the Dolphins might just turn around and draft a safety in the first round. We'll see. But I would not be stunned if Davis and Melifonwu ended up being a pretty solid safety duo on the back end for them on those deals. So I did like those. But we knew they weren't going to have a ton of room to make a bunch of moves. So we're grading these teams on a curve in terms of what was possible for them. And I'm going to give the Dolphins a B. I think they did a good job with what they had to work with. I think everything is logically adds up for what they needed. It's just they only had so much room to have this incredible offseason. But for Chris Greer in that front office, you do get a thumbs up from me. Then we have our final team in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills. Very quiet offseason for the Bills. They've been mostly focused on contract extensions. They give Josh Allen a massive contract. Terrell Bernard gets brought back here. Greg Rousseau gets a contract extension. And Christian Benford, their number one corner, is going to be any matter of time here for them. So they've been focused on getting their key players back. But they did do a couple things. They signed on offense. They signed wide receiver Josh Palmer to a 3-year, $36 million contract. On the defensive line, they've been busy. They released Von Miller. They brought in Joey Bosa. And then they signed a pair of defensive linemen that will be suspended for the first 6 weeks of the season. I think they said one of these they were expected, and the other was they got caught off guard by. But both Larry Ogunjobi on a 1-year deal and Michael Hoyt on a 3-year, $21 million deal. Both players will be suspended for PEDs for 6 games. And then in the secondary, they had some budget moves. They bring DeMar Hamlin back. They bring Dane Jackson back from Carolina. And then Dane Jackson started his career as a slot corner for them, or a do-it-all corner for them. Spent last year in Carolina. He comes back on the cheap after not working out down there. And then Derek Forrest, one of my guys, comes over from Washington on a cheap 1-year deal. Someone that this regime still has some connections to the old Washington regime. The Ron Rivera, McDermott, and the front office connections are very strong between the old Commanders regime. But anyway, in terms of talking points for the Bills, I wanted to start by discussing their contract extensions. I don't have any major opinions here. Terrell Bernard gets his big contract extension here in Buffalo. We knew that was coming. I've been lower on Terrell Bernard. I think he's got tackling issues. I don't think he's a physically imposing player. I don't think he's as good as Bills fans want you to think he is. He is anytime I bring him up, Bills fans, I don't understand it. It's like he's their Justin Fields, if you will, in terms of hype. He's a fine player. I was happy to see for the Bills' sake that his price wasn't absurd because of how much they like him in that building. $12 million a year for Terrell Bernard is fine. I think he's a good coverage player. I think he's an instinctive coverage player at least. And I'm happy that he didn't cost them $16, $17 million because of how much really faith and how much they've publicly talked about him. I feel like he had a lot of leverage to get a lot of money, and that didn't end up happening. It was a fair deal for what he is. So they get him back. Christian Benford, by the way, is going to happen. I think it probably would have been done already, but the Derek Stingley contract was looming. And now that it's been done, Christian Benford's going to come back to the table and be like, yeah, that $20 million contract I was going to sign for, we might need to come a little bit, closer to the Stingley deal on that one. So that'll be interesting to see how much he ends up getting with that corner market skyrocketing in the last week. And then it was fascinating that Josh Allen signs for just a little bit less than he probably could have. He takes $55 million a year. Reminds me a little bit of the deal Mahomes took, where it's a 5-6 year deal. It's a massive deal. Going to give the Bills a lot of cap flexibility. Josh Allen easily could have come out and said, I need to be the highest paid quarterback. And, do that whole dance. He didn't. So good for Josh Allen. Good for the Bills. It's going to be a pretty workable deal there. So that was notable. But as far as the moves that they did make, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of the Josh Palmer signing for the Bills here. To me, that is, number one, a barrier for Keon Coleman to really develop as Josh Allen's chemistry trust guy. I like Keon Coleman. I was excited for him to get that big opportunity next year. That's not really going to happen with Josh Palmer. To me, $12 million for Josh Palmer, I just think he's a fine wide receiver 3, take him or leave him type. Nobody you can't find in the 3rd, 4th round of the draft, especially when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen. It's not like he was great last year for the Chargers when they needed him to be great. So that signing, I really didn't understand. I would have much rather them just bring Mac Hollins back for what he did for them. So that was definitely interesting. I would ding them for that. And then, they flip Von Miller for Nick Bosa. To me, I said this when Bosa got released. It was kind of a preface to be careful with hyping up Bosa signing anywhere, because he has not been able to be healthy. He has not been as efficient as he once was. This is a guy that's flirted with retirement and just has not shown that he can get healthy and stay healthy. Now, sure, that, here in May, in March, he's theoretically healthy. He's ready to go. But for me, just be careful with this. Now, of course, they didn't pay a ton for him. I like the signing for the Bills. I want to be clear about that. It's just, this does remind me a little bit of when the Rams signed Tre'Davious White from the Bills, something Bills fans should be pretty familiar with where we're coming from there. Everybody freaked out when the Rams got Tre'Davious White for a 1-year, $8 million deal. And it's like, well, he doesn't play. And when he does play, it wasn't the same. That's what we're talking about with Bosa. Now, I do think Bosa's a little bit of a step ahead of where Trey White was when he signed with the Rams. But I don't think this is a slam dunk signing for the Bills. I think it's a smart move that comes with very little risk. This is not what they did with Von Miller, where it's a 6-year deal and you're cutting him 3 years later and presumably taking out some dead cap to do that. But in terms of what this swap of Von Miller for Nick Bosa means for the 2025 Bills, I actually think this is more of a high upside move with more downside, because they could have brought Miller back, who, at least Miller, it's not necessarily health concerns with him, right? He had some off-field stuff. He's overpaid. But he at least was one of the most efficient pass rushers in football last year, just coming off the bench, getting off after the quarterback on later downs. You at least knew what you had in Von Miller. I think he had a pressure rate of like 16% or something really nice. Like, he was at least contributing once he came off the suspension last year. With Bosa, you might get a guy that's just not there for you in December. So to me, the floor of this swap, really, of veteran edge rushers is actually much lower, but the ceiling's much higher, because Bosa could actually be someone that, if you can get a healthy year out of him, you actually have a starter opposite of Rousseau. You have someone that doesn't have to, play a limited, can only play 15 snaps a game or whatever, and can only come in on third downs. Like, you actually have someone that's a scheme fit, can play 3 downs for you. And, if he can get and stay healthy, he is a dynamic number one type of edge rusher. Obviously, he's not that old. He's only 29, 30 years old, but he is physically old. He has just worn down, physically speaking. So, again, I understand the signing. I just think we got to be careful with how we talk about it and what it could mean for the Bills. And then in terms of the other defensive line signings they made, Ogunjobi, Michael Hoyt, I don't have any super strong opinions on it. This is kind of what they do, just kind of replenish the defensive line with a lot of depth. I think they're fine signings for what they paid them. I don't have any strong opinions about either of these guys. They're solid rotational players, which is what they'll be for them here. But them both being suspended for 6 games is pretty wild. I'm just going to say that. Unlucky for the Bills that got dropped on them. honestly, my favorite thing that they did was the Derek Forrest signing on the back end of that defense. I had a big tweet about it. Bills fans took it and ran with it, mostly positive from Bills Mafia there. I'm a Derek Forrest fan. You go back to his tape in 2023, looked to me like he was emerging as at least a quality starting safety. Then the new regime comes in, they change the scheme, and he becomes kind of an afterthought. They had a deep safety group. They go with Jeremy Chin, and Quan Martin rotates over from slot corner to play in that safety group. Derek Forrest kind of quickly became a forgotten man, but he's a guy that's made plays. He's shown when he was in this defense, it was essentially the same defensive scheme that Ron Rivera ran. That's why there's so much swapping of players between those two teams over the last 4 years or so. But he showed a comfort with that system, and it obviously didn't work with Dan Quinn's idea for what that defense was going to look like. But in my opinion, I look at the Bills' depth chart. In my opinion, Derek Forrest is the best player on their depth chart right now. And that's not a popular opinion because I know Bills fans like Taylor Rapp. He's got ball skills. He loves to hit. He's a fun player. Was a hyped-up draft player, all that. Look, Taylor Rapp is slow. He's a liability on the back end in a quarters type of defense. A smart offense with explosive players is going to be able to take advantage of Taylor Rapp being a full-time starter on the back end. Now, if you can make Taylor Rapp a dime back and just let him float around the middle of the field and lurk and hit people and be a playmaker and go for the football, I actually love him in that role. But as a starting safety in Sean McDermott's defense, I don't love him. And that's my opinion on Taylor Rapp. I think Derek Forrest is a better player as a starting safety in this defense. Rapp might be a better overall player and a more impactful player if he could just be a dime back. But that's my opinion on Rapp. And then like Damar Hamlin, look, great story. I hate to even say a bad word about him, but I just think Derek Forrest is a better player than Damar Hamlin. I don't think Bills fans are going to argue with me too much on that one. And then Cole Bishop, loved him as a second-round pick. Things didn't work out for him. I can't say he's better than Derek Forrest at this point in time. So I'm very interested to see how this plays out. Can Forrest win a starting job there? Or at least, can you get Taylor Rapp into more of a dime back role like we described with either Bishop or Hamlin on the back end and letting Rapp be a little bit more of what he's good at, which is being a see ball, get ball type of safety. So I like that. And I like getting Dane Jackson back too. You know what you're getting in him as a emergency starter. They still need another starting corner. I think that could come in the draft. That might still be coming in free agency. I don't know. But if you can get Dane Jackson back for dirt cheap, someone you're very familiar with, I like doing that as well. So they're a little bit deeper in the secondary. I'm a fan of it. So for me, for the Bills, I gave them a B- because they did kind of, they got the 6-game suspensions on those two guys. It's just a little bit tougher to stomach. The Miller for Bosa swap for me is makes sense, but we'll see how that goes. And then I like the Forrest signing. So, and I'm just not a huge fan of the Josh Palmer move again. So I did ding them for that down to a B-. All right, let's move on to the AFC South and the Houston Texans, who made one of the blockbuster moves of free agency, trading Laramie Tunsil to the Washington Commanders for a future second-round pick. We'll have to talk about that. But they made a lot of changes on the offensive line, especially. They release Shaq Mason, so probably their two best offensive linemen for last year are out. And then they bring in Tomlinson from the Seahawks, still kicking around, and Ed Ingram from the Minnesota Vikings, basically their own version of Kenyon Green, who was sent to Philadelphia in exchange for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who we'll talk about in a second. But a bunch of moves on the offensive line. They make another trade for wide receiver Christian Kirk. They also add Justin Watson and Braxton Berrios as depth. That's really all we have for the offense for the Texans. Defensively, they bring Sheldon Rankins back from a year ago. after a short stint in Cincinnati. 1 year, $5.5 million. They bring Derek Barnett back on a 1 year, $4 million extension. They add a linebacker in Nick Niemann, 2 year, $6 million deal. And then they do get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in that trade with the Eagles. And then they give Derek Stingley a massive, massive contract extension, shattering the cornerback market, getting $30 million a year after just a couple years ago, the top corner was getting about $23 million. So the biggest talking point for the Texans is, of course, the offensive line shakeup. I just don't see the vision here from Houston. For me, if you're going to trade away Laramie Tunsil, you're telling me a future second-round pick is the best they could have gotten? I still see a guy that can pass protect at a franchise left tackle level, one of the best pass protectors in the league. When we talk about this move for Washington, I will be discussing it as one of the best acquisitions any team made this offseason. For Houston, this is reminiscent for me of when they gave away DeAndre Hopkins in his prime for a second-round pick. This is up there for one of the most head-scratching trades of the last decade. I just don't see this working for Houston. It's pretty crazy to me that they only got what they did and that they decided to trade him to begin with. Like, this offensive line was a disaster last year. And then the moves that they made to follow up from that, they released Shaq Mason, which I get. He's older. That move in a vacuum would add up. But the fact that you also trade away Tunsil, it's like, hello, like, I get these guys are older, but CJ Stroud's going to die. Like, come on. He almost died last year. And then for their, their additions to be Ed Ingram from Minnesota, who they're not going to miss him. Like, yeah, he's got physical tools, and I do think his tape in his second year was okay, but he ends up getting benched because he led all guards in pressure rate last year. And then Laken Tomlinson, who has played better in this system, which actually we don't even necessarily know what the offense is fully going to look like, but they did go with the Rams pass game coordinator, right? So presumably going to be a similar kind of wide zone style system. He's played better in that system than he did in Seattle last year, but as a run blocker, Tomlinson was second or third in pressure rate allowed last year. We saw what happened with that interior offensive line for Seattle last year. So I'm really, really worried about this offensive line, and I don't know how you couldn't be. So I don't approve of what they did there. Now, going to get Christian Kirk is a decent little trade for them. You look at the wide receiver market, and they don't really like what they see, so they're going to kind of risk it on Christian Kirk, who I do think can still play. He's battled with some injuries, and his efficiency's fallen off, but they get him back, or they get him from Jacksonville for a cheap pick, and they get him on a 1 year deal. It was interesting to me that they restructured it so that he's only like a $3.5 million cap hit this year. He's going to be an $11.5 million dead cap next year on a void year, and then $3 million the next two after that. So they took a $24 million contract and basically reduced it down to $4 million this year and put all of that money into the future. So that was a little aggressive. I would have liked to eat a little bit more of that cap hit this season because I feel like they're going to want some wiggle room as they look to extend. Stroud and Nico Collins certainly is going to be looking at this wide receiver market and saying, hey, we're going to have to come back to the table here. But I think it was a fine move going to get Christian Kirk. And then on the defense, I do like the moves they made defensively. If they're not going to have a lot of wiggle room, getting Rankins back, assuming he can maybe do what he did the year before, where he was a really disruptive, good player. He earned a huge deal in Cincinnati. And he dealt with a lot of injuries and stuff last year, which has been his thing throughout his career. But I do like getting him back for a $5.5 million deal. Just another piece on that D-line. Like bringing Derek Barnett back. I think he's a perfect third edge player. A great price for him. And then Nick Niemann is a nice signing. I think he's played well for the Chargers in limited opportunities. He was a great athlete coming out of Iowa and took time to develop, but that's the type of deal that I like signing these linebackers on. Get them after their rookie contract, after they've learned in the NFL for a bunch of time. Get guys that have those traits. Wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about Nick Niemann similarly to how we talked about Blake Cashman working in this system. We'll see if he can kind of earn the starting job. You got Christian Harris there that hasn't really worked out. Henry To'oTo'o was starting. I think Nick Niemann can take that job. 2-year, $6 million deal. I like that it's a 2-year deal because if he does hit, you get him on the cheap the next year. So going to kind of call my shot a little bit. Nick Niemann, good signing for them. And then in the secondary, I do like adding Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They've made it very clear for Houston kind of how they want to structure this defense. They like their corner duo on the outside. They very much like their corner duo with what they're paying Derek Stingley. So Derek Stingley is going to be, pressing guys, number one corner. You've got Kamari Lassiter's kind of playing off, hoping targets get funneled his way, kind of playing that top-down, off-zone style coverage, but don't get beat over the top. If you get picked down underneath, they'll find ways to work around that. But Lassiter, really good rookie year. And then they just want a bunch of banshees in the middle of their defense. They're not even really going to term these guys safeties or slot corners, but it's Jalen Petrie, who most people would tell you is a safety right now. He's going to be a nickel player. They still have Jimmy Ward on this roster. They might release him after they got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. But Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as well, being that kind of nickel bandit safety. And then they want Kalen Bullock, their rangy, young, free safety, as the guy over the top with all these guys trying to cause chaos in the middle of the field. You got your outside corner set up. You got a great defensive line, a linebacker room you're hoping is coming along. Really, really like this defense. I love that they started to play at kind of a championship level last year. I think, with Jimmy Ward getting older, struggling to stay healthy, getting Chauncey Gardner-Johnson over him is a great move because he's a very similar player. He's both a safety and a slot corner and just a playmaker that brings a ton of energy to the defense. So I really liked going to get him, and tremendous value just shipping off. He's basically a cap casualty for the Eagles, and you're able to bring him in on a pretty cheap deal too because, he was signed last year to like a 3-year, $30 million contract, right? I'm looking this up right now. Yeah, it was 3 years, $27 million. So you inherit the second 2 years of that. That's not bad. That's not bad at all, especially with the safety market where it's at. So I do really like what they did with the defense, but to me, what's going on with the offense, I can't explain it. Like I just cannot get behind potentially ruining your season. And I don't want to overreact here in March, but they are playing with fire. And they're playing with the safety and health of their franchise quarterback. This rings in Colts, Andrew Luck, what we saw early with Joe Burrow. Like you gotta protect these young franchise quarterbacks, man. So I'm worried about the offensive side of things with the Texans. It's crazy how quickly, and I know I'm not even having a Stroud Bryce Young debate here, but it is very crazy how quickly it feels like Stroud's rookie year, the Texans actually managed to put a really sustainable, well, at least, good structure around him with the O-line and the receivers. And it feels like in Carolina, things are shifting where now Bryce has the offensive line and the players. But anyway, I'm not going to go down that road, but these guys will be forever linked, and it's been crazy to see the shift in surrounding cast between those two guys from that draft. But I gave the Texans a D+. As much as I like some of these subtle moves on the defense, it was not enough for me to ignore them ignoring the offensive line and what they got for Tunsil. I just cannot believe it. All right, Tennessee Titans, they have done nothing at quarterback as we go through their list of moves here. I will talk about that and the implications of that, but at wide receiver and tight end, they've been pretty quiet. They lose Nuke Westbrook, Akine. They add Van Jefferson to a 1-year, $1.7 million contract, basically a come see if you can make the team type of signing. Offensive line, they spend big on Dan Moore, getting a 4-year, $82 million contract. Wow. It's a lot of money for Dan Moore. Kevin Zeitler, though, 1 year, $9 million at right guard. With this, they have made the decision to put J.C. Latham back at right tackle, where he played in college, and they even signed Blake Hance, who had some good games under Bill Callahan up in Cleveland. So that was really what they were focused on with the offense, was the O-line. Defensively, love that they brought back Sebastian Joseph Day on a 1-year, $6.5 million contract. They also added Draymond Jones. I'll talk a little bit about his fit on this defense in a second. They also signed Cody Barton, the linebacker who had a career year in Denver last year, 3 years, $21 million. Great value for him. And then defensive back, they released Chidobe Awuzie. That signing did not work out for them, and they signed safety Xavier Woods to a 2-year, $20 million contract. So my talking points on the Titans, number one, it's that the lack of a move for a quarterback seems to scream that they're staying put. Number one, taking Cam Ward. That's becoming a more and more popular stance on this. So that's a takeaway worth noting. I don't really have too much else to say about that. But let's talk about the offensive line, the Dan Moore contract, 4 years, $82 million. Look, was it an overpay? Yes. Was it possibly the biggest overpay of any player in free agency this year? It's up there. I think Harold Landry, Aaron Banks for the Packers are probably, in that conversation. But there were no tackles on the market, man. There were not. And you look at where the Titans are at, and your options are what? Don't pay Dan Moore a bunch of money where he probably had similar types of deals elsewhere. Like I would be willing to bet some of these other left tackle desperate teams were on the phone with Dan Moore. We know that for a fact is true based on some of the reports about him before free agency ever started. So either his agent swindled the Titans and lied, or this is what they really had to pay for Dan Moore. But either way, I said this to Garrett when we did our free agent live stream. What were your other options? Because the Titans, however they manage the draft, are not drafting a tackle with their top pick. I think they're either picking at 1 or they're going to move down with the Giants and pick 3, in which case they will take either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, which, by the way, while we're on that topic, their moves also indicate the fact that they still need an edge, they still need an outside corner, and they still need wide receiver. Those are the 3 spots that they didn't spend money, really. They still are theoretically flexible in the draft, but quarterback, obviously, not going after a veteran option screams Cam Ward number 1. But anyway, they're not getting a tackle in the first round. They're probably not spending their second round pick on tackle because if you look at the draft board, it's like, you got your top guys that are all going to go like top 20. And then you have Josh Connerly Jr., who's kind of in that 20 to 32 range. Maybe he's there, but there's no guarantee you get him. And then there's a massive drop-off at tackle. So I don't think they would love to take a tackle to start in the second round. There's some interesting projects, but they tried that project thing with Nicholas Petit-Frere. So they kind of had to do the Dan Moore thing. And I also don't hate it because I do think it's setting J.C. Latham up for his best version of success. And you can go back to, I talked in depth about J.C. Latham, where he's at. Basically, he's better than I thought he would be, but he's not perfect. I like him as a right tackle because his deficiencies come in quick losses in pass protection with his slow feet. He can lose the edge where those strip sacks come in, and he can overset and lose to inside counters. It didn't happen all the time, but he had some ugly games this year. You want your right tackle to be able to, or you want your quarterback to be able to feel that out. So unless you're drafting a lefty to be your quarterback and you're bringing in Gabriel to be your starting quarterback, I do think the best success is going to be Latham at right tackle in that situation. So I actually like the concept of that. And you get to put him next to a veteran, a signing that I really like in Kevin Zeitler for 1 year, $9 million. As a Packers fan, I'm very happy to see him leave Detroit. But you now have, for Tennessee, 5 starting caliber players on your offensive line. You have risen that floor to a tremendous degree with Dan Moore, who isn't ideal, but he's not a nightmare. You have Skoronski at left guard. Had a great year last year. Hopefully Cushenberry can stay healthy. You're paying him a lot of money. You got Zeitler and you got Latham. You can now put Cam Ward behind that. Maybe you use that second-round pick on a wide receiver to put next to Ridley and Okonkwo and Pollard. And that's a real offense that a young quarterback can come in and play with an offensive coach that's ready to go. So I understand it's a lot of money for Dan Moore, but I think I'd rather just overpay, have that certainty that you can at least have a unit that you can trust and not have to worry about that group. So I actually don't hate it, even if it's more than I would have liked to spend. And if I'm a Titans fan, frankly, I don't know that I'm that upset about it, because they have the other thing too is they have a shit ton of money to throw around. Like, they're not going to look back on this and be like, oh my God, we can't sign anyone because we're giving Dan Moore $21 million. Like, they've got plenty of wiggle room. So I actually kind of like what they did on the O-line. And then over to the defense, love getting Sebastian Joseph Day back. He was really good last year as a third he'd be a good number 2 defensive tackle for most teams. And in that situation with Sweat and Simmons, he really had a nice year getting to play with those guys. So keep a strength to strength, get him back. Love that. And then they do sign Draymond Jones, 1 year, $10 million. So, it's a fine risk. Draymond Jones has been asked to play edge rusher in Seattle. He's been horrible at it. He's oversized. His moves don't work out there. It was a bad signing for Seattle. I'm curious to see what their plan is for Draymond Jones, because they are deep on the interior. I like Draymond Jones in a situation where you're hopefully going to rush him as a 3-tech more often, but I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen when they don't have any edge rushers and they have 3 interior starters. So I don't know that that's the best fit for him. We'll see how they end up using him, though. So that's just going to be something to monitor next year and more of a note. Love the Cody Barton signing at linebacker. Raise the floor and ceiling of that group. I think he broke out last year. He's one of these athletic mid-round picks that took a long time to figure it out. Thought his tape was really good. So 3 years, $21 million. If he's as good as he was in Denver last year, that's going to be a slam dunk signing. He's going to be a huge value for them. And then, Xavier Woods is kind of whatever. Releasing Awuzie is kind of whatever. What stood out to me about the secondary there is that right now Jarvis Brownlee is going to hold on to that starting job with Awuzie getting released. He's a fun player. He's a really fun player for those that watch Titans games. Not the most lockdown cover player, but an instinctive playmaker. Loves to play the run, loves to hit, good ball skills. And then the other takeaway I had was with them losing Nick Westbrook-Akine and only bringing in Van Jefferson at wide receiver, we'll see how the draft goes, obviously. But you look at their depth chart right now, and Treylon Burks is a starter. I'm just saying, year 4 breakout for Treylon Burks coming in. I'm not counting on it, but he's going to have an opportunity unless things change. So those were a couple last comments I had on this. So I'm going to give the Titans a B, actually. I think some people are going to slam them for the Dan Moore signing. I don't think it's going to be a jeopardizing signing. I think that offensive line is going to be tremendously improved. And if the Titans, who were second in cap space with like $115 million to spend, end up wishing they would have paid him $10 million less and he gets released in a couple years, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. So a B for the Titans. And then we have the Indianapolis Colts. Have been mostly quiet other than the secondary, but I'll run through their moves. So they did bring in Daniel Jones at quarterback, 1 year, $14 million. We'll talk about that in a second. But they bring in Khalil Herbert as a backup running back. They do lose Will Fries and Ryan Kelly on the offensive line and haven't done anything to replace those guys. They did sign Neville Gallimore at defensive tackle. And then again, really the only true thing to note here, other than the Daniel Jones signing, is in the secondary, they signed Cam Bynum to a 4-year, $60 million contract at safety coming over from the Vikings. And then one of my favorite signings of the offseason, Shavarius Ward to the Colts at 3 years, $54 million. Really happy for Shavarius Ward, by the way. Had a hell of a year in a bad way. Not just battling injuries on the field, but in a far more darker light, lost his baby girl last year. So just a devastating season. Happy to see him get something to celebrate, a $54 million contract. So for the Colts, you got to start there in the secondary. I like the defensive back moves. I think it puts them in a very competitive space with that secondary. They bring in Lou Anarumo, who I'm sure told them, like, hey, if you watch the tape from when we really struggled in Cincinnati, I can't run my defense without, a good secondary. I need safeties that know what they're doing, that are versatile. I need a number one corner that can press and do everything. And I need other corners that, aren't going to be a weak spot. So they come in, give Lou Anarumo his defense. And when he has multiple, diverse pieces like this, Cam Bynum, a safety that converted from corner that can do a little bit of everything. And he's got a Shavarius Ward who's a great press man corner, but also good in cover 3, cover 4. He can do anything you want him to do. That's when you can really get into those game plan specific scripts for Lou Anarumo, where he's had some great playoff performances, molding and adapting his defense specifically tuned to what the opponent likes to do. With the previous roster, without these players, they didn't have those strong pivot points. And now you got, obviously, Kenny Moore is great in the slot. He's going to be their version of Mike Hilton, who was in that defense. But now Nick Cross becomes a third, fourth piece, not someone that needs to emerge as a star. You have some young corners in Jalen Jones and Sam Womack and Juju Brents. Only one of those guys needs to be a good player instead of all of them kind of needing to step it up. So I do really like those moves. 4 years, $60 million on Cam Bynum. It's a little rich. I get why they did it. I get why he was their guy. For me, I would have spent up a little bit more to get a little bit more of a playmaker on the back end, swing for perhaps a Javon Holland. I think would have been a lot more exciting. Cam Bynum's not the most exciting player, and that's a lot of money for kind of a high floor, do-it-all safety that's not really a huge playmaker. He does have good ball skills when the ball's in his area, but he doesn't have like crazy range, or he's not this super impact run defender. He's a solid overall player. So if there's any ding, it's that he was a little bit more expensive than I would like to pay a player like him. But overall, I think it makes sense that Lou Anarumo came in and wanted to improve the secondary. So I am excited to see what this defense can do next year with Lou. Offensively, they obviously felt pretty good about their guys. I will say, losing both of those interior offensive linemen, it's fine losing Ryan Kelly, because Tanner Bortolini played well as a rookie out of Wisconsin last year, but I would love to see the Colts go back to the veteran free agent market and find somebody, whether it's picking up Shaq Mason, who got cut from the Texans, or giving a call to Tevin Jenkins from the Bears. Like, I don't want to roll into next year with Dalton Tucker, Danny Pinter, Josh Sills, Wesley French as my right guard options. I don't. And maybe they think Matt Goncalves could play guard. He played well for them, but I don't know. I would want to go get a veteran at guard after how the offseason played out for them. And then the last point I had on the Colts is the Daniel Jones signing. I just think it's funny that they're like, it's the perfect signing to be like, okay, Anthony Richardson, can you at least like beat out Daniel Jones for us this offseason? Like, it's just enough to be like, we're not seriously trying to replace you, Anthony Richardson, but we will. Like, if you don't give us a good feeling about starting you week 1, $14 million for Daniel Jones, we will start him. Like, it's enough of a threat to just let it. I'm not saying he's got bad work ethic or anything like that, but sometimes a little kick in the ass is good for anybody. So it's just the perfect enough signing. And look, Richardson's a guy that has not been able to stay on the field. Daniel Jones, I understand, is a meme fest, right? But he can, in this Colts infrastructure, I do think he could run Shane Steichen's offense. He actually does provide a threat as a QB run. You don't have to change that aspect with Anthony Richardson. Ironically, the best thing Daniel Jones does is design QB runs. He's actually pretty damn good at it. And he's fast. He's not nearly what Anthony Richardson is, but you can continue to do that stuff in a backup situation for Jones. And I actually think his ability to run the RPOs and just distribute the ball, it's actually a pretty decent setup for Daniel Jones to have, to play closer to the 2022 version of him as he did for Brian Dable. So I think that signing is perfectly fine. So I like what the Colts did. I give it a B grade. I just would love to see them do something on the offensive line there. But let's go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So not a ton of stuff going on for Jacksonville. A lot of releases and cleaning house. So their key moves at playmaker, wide receiver, tight end. They obviously traded Christian Kirk to the Texans. They cut Evan Ingram. And then they sign in Dyami Brown, wide receiver from Washington, Hunter Long, tight end from the Rams, and Johnny Munt, tight end from the Vikings. On the offensive line, Brandon Scherf is out. If Scherf, by the way, wants to keep playing, he's another guy I would love to see as a signing for the Colts at right guard. So looking at a couple of those interdivision cuts maybe for that right guard spot for the Colts. But anyway, Brandon Scherf not going to be back. They bring in Patrick McCarry, 3 years, $37.5 million from the Ravens, and then Robert Hainsey from the Bucks on a 3-year, $21 million contract. Also Chuma Edoga on a 2-year, $7 million deal. And then some moves in the secondary. They sign Jordan Lewis from Dallas to a 3-year, $30 million contract. Eric Murray from Houston to a 3-year, $20 million contract. Both guys presumably will be starting for them, especially Jordan Lewis. And then an interesting result of that is Jarrian Jones, their rookie slot corner from last year, will presumably be kicking outside, or at least having to compete as an outside corner for the Jags. So this was a pretty quiet offseason for the Jags, and I like it because the last two coaches, Urban Meyer and Doug Peterson, what did they do when they took over? They came in like they knew exactly what they needed, like they knew what the locker room was like they just knew exactly what they had to grab, plug it in, and we're good to go. They spent a bunch of money, they bring in their guys, all of it, and both times didn't work. This time, I love that Cohen and the new front office, forgive me, I should give a shout out to the Jags, new GM, replacing Trent Baalke, James Gladstone. They are going to take an evaluation year. They want to raise the floor with some sound signings that aren't overpays, guys like Jordan Lewis and the guys on the offensive line. I think those are fine moves, right? Nothing to get terribly excited about, but fine moves. I do think Jordan Lewis is a nice player. But they're not going to spend a bazillion dollars. They're going to come in, give young players a chance, and let things play out. Let the culture play out. Let these, it's like when a company, when a business gets acquired, they have to come in and like evaluate everything. Which employees are producing for the company? Which ones are slacking and need to go? Like that's the type of year the Jags are going to have while they compete. So I think that's a really smart way to go about things. And they should be set up pretty well to get aggressive next offseason, I would think. That said, they made one of those moves I named is a slam dunk signing that I'm in love with, and it is the Dyami Brown signing. This would be one of the this would make like a list of free agent sleepers. Dyami Brown, I've always been a believer. Late last season, he really started to put things together, developed more of a trust with Jaden Daniels, and showed the vertical skills, the run after catch skills. My high-end pro comp for Dyami Brown coming out was Chris Godwin, in the sense of not that he's as big as Chris Godwin, but the ways that he wins, the way he moves, the way he can manipulate players after the catch. This is Liam Cohen's offense that was killing it with Chris Godwin earlier in the year with that role. Love him as a compliment to Brian Thomas Jr. Now he's going to have to beat out Gabe Davis. I think he will, because it's this regime that picked Dyami Brown. They are inheriting Gabe Davis, who they probably anticipate cutting after this season. What a bad contract that was. But really excited to be targeting Dyami Brown late in my best ball drafts and all that type of stuff. So I love that pick. As far as the offensive line moves, again, I think they're fine. McCarry's a nice, versatile player. Can play guard, can play tackle if Little just can't stay healthy, which is something on their radar, I think. And Robert Hainsey's not a great player. He got kind of flushed out in Tampa, but I do think he's a better center than Luke Fortner, so I understand that move as well. But I gave the Jaguars a B grade as well, just because I'm actually happy for them that they are being honest about, like, we need a year to figure out what we actually need here before spending a bunch of money again. So I like the process from Jacksonville. All right. The Kansas City Chiefs, as we move to the AFC West, Chiefs have been low-key kind of busy, doing a lot of tinkering with their roster. They bring in Elijah Mitchell, running back from the Niners. They also re-signed Kareem Hunt to a one-year, $1.5 million contract. They brought back Hollywood Brown for basically a do-over on last year's contract. On the offensive line, they trade away Joe Thuney to the Chicago Bears. They franchise tag Trey Smith. And they sign tackle Jalen Moore from the Niners for a 2-year, $30 million contract. On defense, they are thinning out on the defensive line. They lose Tershawn Wharton and Derek Nadi, but they bring in Jerry Tillery from Minnesota. At linebacker, they extended Nick Bolton. A bit of a surprise on that one. Felt like he was going to hit the market. And then in the secondary, they lose Justin Reed, but sign Christian Fulton over from the Chargers on a 2-year, $20 million contract. So a lot of kind of tinkering here, but a lot of stuff to kind of react to. So honestly, one of my biggest takeaways here is I love that they were able to get Hollywood Brown back. Just kind of a wasted season. He made some catches down the stretch, but just it was unrealistic to expect a major impact from him. But they were really excited about what he was doing in camp, and then he goes down for obviously almost the whole season. And I like just kind of running that back. Worthy showed some good promise at the very end of the year, but I do think realistically Hollywood Brown is a more proven deep threat. And having two of those guys is pretty fun too. They are obviously totally prepared to have two guys. So I just like getting that juice back and kind of going for it again, admitting like, hey, it didn't work out last year, but it's because he was hurt and Worthy was super young. So let's actually do this again and try to open things up with the offense. And he was cheap. So I like that for both parties. Offensive line, obviously a lot of movement there. It's definitely starting to get messy with that offensive line. It's not probably where they want it to be, but their options were limited. As we talked about with Dan Moore, they obviously were going to get priced out on Dan Moore. They can't afford a 4-year, $82 million contract on Dan Moore. They couldn't afford to keep Joe Thuney and Trey Smith. So things are getting messy, but in terms of trading Thuney away and keeping Trey Smith, I understand it, because it's basically, would you rather have the 33-year-old guard or the 25-year-old guard or whatever Trey Smith is? If you're going to have to pay one of them and let one go, you might as well get a pick for Thuney and pay the younger player. I understand that thinking. And then at tackle, Jalen Moore, it's an interesting dice roll. He's got the traits. He's played well in San Francisco in like very limited looks. Basically, whenever Trent Williams hasn't been there, Moore's played left tackle, and he's played all right. So they like the tape. I'm surprised the contract was that much, but that's a testament to this market. So it's definitely a risky signing. It adds some volatility to their season, but I feel like he could play okay for them. He could also suck, but they're doing what they can do, and I kind of get what they're going for, but it's just not an ideal situation. There's no other way to put it with the offensive line. Interior defensive line, it's really thinning out. They lose Wharton to a big deal to the Panthers. They lose Nadi to the Jets. Bring in Jerry Tillery, who's a good, in theory, a Wharton replacement as a pass rushing specialist type of piece, but not gonna fill in what Nadi was able to do for you as a run defender. So they're getting thinner on the D line for sure. That's becoming a huge need for them. Extending Nick Bolton is fascinating to me because I understand it. Nick Bolton's awesome. He's a great leader for them, and they love him. Spags loves him. I'm not really going to argue with them bringing him back, but we do know the Chiefs are they're pushing pennies as they try to extend this window here. And I just would be a little bit worried, especially after seeing Stingley's extension and what Trent McDuffie's going to cost them. I would be a little bit worried that Nick Bolton is going to cost them Leo Chenal. Because to me, this was the year Leo Chenal was going to get a starting opportunity and blow up. I mean, we know what he does in the role that they use him in, playing about half their snaps, but get a full-time role for Leo Chenal, who to me is just a superstar in the making. Demario Davis was my pro comp on him coming out. I think he would have emerged as that as a starter. If I'm a Chiefs fan, as much as I like Nick Bolton, I'm willing to give Chenal that chance, and then maybe you are able to use a little bit more of that money to keep Joe Thuney for a year maybe, or get ready to pay Leo Chenal in a year, because I'm a little worried that Chenal is going to be like, fine, you don't like me that much? I'm out of here. Like, I'm not messing around with being an LB3 anymore. I'm going to get that money. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to monitor. It doesn't mean Leo Chenal can't be a long-term starter and end up on this team for the long haul, but I certainly would be worried about losing him if I'm a Chiefs fan right now with that extension. And I just think Chenal's ceiling is even higher than Bolton's. So that one was interesting to me. And then I did like the Christian Fulton signing. I think that's exactly what they needed. They needed to raise the floor of their CB2, their outside corner spot. They have Watson and who's the other guy? Watson and Williams, and then Najee Johnson played a little bit for them last year. But they actually, those outside corners were getting picked on last year, so they didn't need a superstar. They've got that in Trent McDuffie, but they needed someone else to kind of raise the floor of that corner room. And then they let Justin Reed go to basically make that move, because they like their safety group. They like Jaden Hicks, what he showed. They like Shamari Connor as a potential safety in the Justin Reed spot. So that one definitely made sense to me. I gave the Chiefs a B- for all the reasons we talked about. They didn't have a ton of wiggle room. The offensive line stuff's starting to worry me a little bit. So they really got a hit on that Jalen Moore dart throw, basically. They got to hit on that, and they got to hope that their young guys at guard can step up, whether it's Suamataia, who they're going to give a go at guard, whether it's my guy Hunter Nauerzad stepping up. But that left side of the line now is spotty, to say the least. Let's talk Chargers. So the Chargers bring in Najee Harris at running back on a 1-year, $9 million deal. They sign Mike Williams back after a trip around the league with the Jets and the Steelers. He's back. They, on the offensive line, get Mekhi Becton at 2 years, $20 million. They sign Bradley Bozeman back on a 2-year, $6 million deal. Tells you what the league thinks about Bradley Bozeman. They signed Taylor Heineke as a backup quarterback to a $6 million contract. On defense, they lose Poona Ford on the defensive line, but they get Khalil Mack and Tyre Tart back. They obviously let Joey Bosa go as well. And then they signed some depth pieces as well in Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones. At linebacker, they get Brashad Perriman back to the Chargers, who just continues to go from team to team and play well when he's healthy. But they get Troy Dye back as well, a veteran linebacker at this point who played well for them. So they get him back. And then in the secondary, they add Dante Jackson to replace Asante Samuel. And they sign Benjamin St-Juste over from Washington. So they've been kind of value hunting, looking to fill depth with small contracts here or there, very similar to what they did last year. They haven't made that big splash quite yet, but I think every move they've made checks the box. Like, I think they're getting a lot of value in these deals. So my favorite one is Najee Harris. I tweeted this out, but I think Najee Harris is going to have a monster season. And this was a ring the bell moment for me. I'm not going to ring the bell because I think the dogs are taking a nap upstairs, and I don't want to wake them up. They don't like the bell. But I had this in my free agent predictions video, just how good of a fit this would be. And especially now that they brought Mekhi Becton in here. Their run game, that's their bread and butter, but they just had a revolving door at running back. Najee Harris, knock on wood, but man, he hasn't missed a start in his career. You can say what you want about his tape and the fact that he's not that fast. That's fine. I think he's a great back. Hasn't got the best run blocking in Pittsburgh. Perfect fit, perfect scheme fit as well. And, he's gone from Pittsburgh that was an outside zone system last year to now a inside smashing system. I think he's going to have a monster season. I think he took a 1-year deal here deliberately because he knows he's going to play well and sees the running back market climbing up, and he could really re-hit the market at 27 years old and get a massive payday, probably here with LA. He's going to be a big fantasy target for me. Big fan of this signing. Great value. I like bringing Mike Williams back as well. Him and Herbert have that chemistry. Just kind of, hopefully, some feel-good feelings coming home. Obviously, a guy that's had injury issues and all that stuff, but for what you got him for, absolutely love the deal. He's uniquely more valuable to the Chargers than he would be for anybody else because he's got that chemistry with Herbert. So I love that. And then, I love the Becton signing. There's some health risk affiliated with the Becton signing. I think, a lot of people are wondering why Philadelphia would let him go. Look, Becton played sweet at guard. I wouldn't say he played amazing. He played very well at guard. Showed the league that a guy his size can do it. But he's a guy that's never been able to stay healthy, ever. Like, the Eagles straight up got lucky that they got a full season of Mekhi Becton. And I think the Eagles were somewhat acknowledging that. For the Chargers, you inherit that injury risk. But, if he can stay healthy like he did last year, I love this signing. Again, inside run game, he's a mauler. You put him next to Joe Alt, combo blocks with those two guys, and Will Dissly as a tight end. Like, that's what the Chargers are all about, man. So I love that. And then I will say, got to be a little bit disappointed that they didn't really make a splash on defense, and got to be a little disappointed that they lost Poona Ford. You're looking to upgrade that interior defensive line, not get worse there. Poona Ford played really well, and it's not like he got a massive contract, right? I think it was in the $10 million a year range. I'm trying to pull this up. He stays in LA but goes to the Rams. He gets about $8 million a year, 3 years, $27 million, 15 guaranteed. I would have given him that before free agency ever started. So I would be a little bit disappointed about losing him. I think he really was an identity piece for that defense. And it's, you've got the draft. Maybe that's indicating they really like Kenneth Grant, Harmon, some of these bigger D tackles in this deep draft class. But I would definitely be worried about the interior, worried about the, just the lack of adding another piece to this defense. You do lose Asante Samuel. We replace him with Dante Jackson, who's, a low-end starting caliber player, a boomer bust, kind of poor man's Asante Samuel. They also lose Christian Fulton, who played well for them. So you're putting a lot of faith in Dante Jackson, Cam Hart, Tarheeb still, like Benjamin St. Juste. Like, it's just not a good secondary. As well as Tarheeb still played last year, I would just be wishing that the Chargers were a little bit more active because they had a lot of money to spend, and this was going to be an exciting year to really go for it. So being a little bit more disappointed in not being more aggressive is why I gave the Chargers a B grade. Whereas maybe if they made a splash for something more exciting, that's where you're going to get that A grade, where I'm really trying to highlight, like, these guys killed it. Do I think the Chargers killed it? No, I think they did a really nice job and got better, which is the point in free agency. And they didn't blow their load. They didn't set themselves up to not be flexible if the opportunity presents itself in the future to go get a superstar player, whether that's a trade or next year free agency. So we can move on from the Chargers. Let's go to the Raiders, who did have a very exciting free agency. So obviously starts by trading for Geno Smith. At running back, they bring in Raheem Mostert on a cheap 1-year deal. Wide receiver, tight end, untouched. Offensive line, they release Andre James and bring in Alex Kappa for 2 years, $11 million from Cincinnati, who's a guard. And then on defense, they sign Malcolm Kuntz back. Love that. And then Adam Butler is back as well. He keeps doing it. 3 years, $16 million. At linebacker, they lose both their starters, Robert Spillane and Divine Diablo, and bring in the thumping Landon Roberts on the cheap from Pittsburgh. And then in the secondary, a lot of movement. They lose Trayvon Merrick and Nate Hobbs to big free agent deals. And then they add Jeremy Chin and Eric Stokes. So let's go through all this. Love the Geno move off the bat. I talked about this in Studs and Duds, actually, but I'll talk about it again. I just feel like this was the best quarterback that was going to be realistic for the Raiders, outside of maybe making a play for Aaron Rodgers, but I understand not getting involved in all that. I think going to get Geno for a third-round pick and a new contract lines up. You reunite him with Pete Carroll, who loves Geno. It just makes sense to me, and it just... The second they hired Pete Carroll, you knew that they weren't going to just blow this thing up. They were going to go for that competitive rebuild. It was part of a reason why I liked the Pete Carroll signing, but I also was like, is it ultimately going to get them to the ceiling that they need to get to? This is a continuation of that idea. If you're in on the Pete Carroll idea of we're trying to do the competitive rebuild, thread the needle type of deal here with a Raiders team that has a lot of work to do, going to get Geno Smith is like the exact move that they should be making. So it makes them a real team. They were fake Pinocchio. They're now a real boy. They're a real player in the NFL that can play spoiler and compete, hopefully, for a wild card position with someone like Geno at quarterback. That was not going to happen with Gardner Minshew and, Aiden O'Connell and all that. And it probably wasn't going to happen with a Justin Fields signing either, if we're being honest. So Geno's another cut above that. He's a real tier 3 starter that's going to get actual offensive line play, and I like the move a lot. Running back, swapping Madison for Raheem Mostert, kind of whatever there. I think we know what's coming at running back, and that's Ashton Jeanty with the 6th pick. So we'll see if that happens. Wide receiver being untouched is interesting. For sure. I think that's going to be a big draft need for them. If they go Jeanty and then target a wide receiver in the top of the second, that would certainly be something to look out for them. But kind of all over the place with the defensive moves here. I love getting Kuntz back on a 1-year deal. I think that's a big win for them. I love the Jeremy Chin addition to this secondary. I think him and Isaiah Polamau as a safety duo is a ton of fun. That's the biggest safety duo in the league for sure. Chin's 6'3", Polamau's 6'4". These guys are fast. They can hit. Excited to watch that duo out there. The linebacker room, though, you lose not just Robert Spillane, which I thought for sure getting him back was going to be a priority for them. They don't just lose him, but they also lose Divine Diablo. They replace him with a Landon Roberts, who's a great run defender, but the reason Roberts was able to have a good year last year for Pittsburgh is they would take him off the field on passing downs. So it's a huge, huge drop-off at linebacker. It's not the end of the world, but definitely notable. We'll see if my guy Eichenberg from Notre Dame ends up competing for starting work there next year. But it is interesting. Linebacker is now a desperate need for them. If they don't go Jeanty, they might shock us all and go just get like Jahad Campbell with the 6th pick, because that linebacker room is quite bad. Maybe they've already made up their mind that that's what they're doing, and they're going to shock us all there. But that was definitely interesting. And then the secondary, I mentioned, I like getting Jeremy Chin, replacing, getting him for cheaper than Merrick. I think that works for me. But losing Nate Hobbs is another tough one to stomach. I would like this team much better if we were sitting here and they had Nate Hobbs back and Robert Spillane back in that defense that they know works for them with Patrick Graham's system. They sign Eric Stokes to a cheap deal. It's a fine move. Eric Stokes is he's one of these guys that you think has all this upside because he's fast and he's tall. he's actually a very high floor, low ceiling corner. He does not process things quickly. He's slow to react with his feet, but because he's fast, he's got decent recovery speed. He was okay for the Packers last year. But I think Hobbs is just a much more impactful playmaking and just a more consistent corner, even if it's from the nickel. And Stokes is going to do it from the outside. So it's not a bad signing to get to Eric Stokes. I just would have loved to see them retain Hobbs. So their offseason was just a little bit up and down for me, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But I do think the Geno move is excellent. And I ultimately like the Raiders offseason because of that. I am going to weigh a good quarterback move above the rest of stuff. So I actually gave the Raiders a B+. We're handing out a lot of B's and B- here today. I wanted to indicate that I like the Raiders offseason just a little bit more than those teams because if you got to go for this competitive rebuild thing, Geno makes a ton of sense to get you to be a real team. So let's move on to the Denver Broncos. Pretty quiet offseason, but the moves they did make were pretty nice. Wide receiver, tight end, they go get Evan Ingram, 2-year, $23 million deal. They were all over him the second Jacksonville released him. Sean Payton was like, yeah, that's perfect for my system. Rest of the offense, dead quiet. Really no moves at O-line, QB, wide receiver. D-line was untouched. Linebacker, they lose Barton, but sign Dre Greenlaw to a 3-year, $31 million deal. And then in the secondary, they don't really lose anybody, but they sign Talanoa Hufanga to a 3-year, $45 million deal. Called this for the Broncos that one of their top targets is going to be a safety. I had it as Trayvon Merrick for a 3-year, $45 million deal. Instead, it's Talanoa Hufanga. But that was definitely a missing piece in that defense, so I love that. But a little bit more on these moves individually. So I do think Evan Ingram, unless they go out and make a splash in the draft and get, a Luther Burden or Matthew Golden or get one of these wide receivers, unless they add another key playmaker, I think Evan Ingram's going to eat in this offense. How many times do we talk about this role in the Sean Payton offense? They had Devon Vele doing the Evan Ingram stuff, the big slot wide receiver role. I don't even really want to call Evan Ingram a tight end at this point. He might put his hand in the dirt 80 times this season. He's not going to play tight end for Denver. He's not. He's going to play slot wide receiver. He's going to be their Marcus Colston. So I might just start calling Evan Ingram a wide receiver at this point, honestly. We'll see how many hand in the dirt snaps he gets next year, but I love the fit. If he stays healthy, he's going to be a top 5 fantasy tight end next year. So he's going to be a early fantasy target for sure. I love that signing. Cheap, 2-year, $23 million deal for an impact playmaker, which is something they needed. Yes, absolutely. Still think he can play. He was just banged up last year. And then at linebacker, look, if you're going to lose Barton, I like going to take a risk on Dre Greenlaw, who did get back on the field last year, but it was late, and the 49ers season was basically over at that point. So I think it's a good deal. 3-year, $31 million. It's well worth the risk. I'm assuming they can get out of that after a year or two, and that it's pretty front loaded, just because of the injury stuff. But it was just one injury. It's not like he's some super injury prone player. So if you can get Dre Greenlaw back, or 95% of Dre Greenlaw, put him in the middle of that defense, love that. And you're reuniting him with Talanoa Hufanga from that Niners defense, filling that safety hole. But I just love the idea of this. Barton and Greenlaw are swapped. Barton played well at linebacker last year, but the one piece on that defense that was a top 3 defense last year that really was an issue was PJ Locke starting as their number 2 safety. Talanoa Hufanga, again, if he's healthy, is a big upgrade in that role. And I love just dropping it's like the punch bowl was made and now they're pouring the vodka in. They're pouring the party in with Talanoa Hufanga. Everything was in place. This is kind of that just game wrecker. Not that he's this game-wrecking elite safety or anything like that, but just a guy that, man, if you want to throw digs over the middle of the field, you better think twice about it, because Hufanga will crunch you. you better make sure you're protecting the football when you get into the second level because he's coming for that football. If you drop the ball over the middle of the field, he's the guy that's always there diving after a tipped ball. He's just that type of player. And I love dropping that into a defense that's going to create those opportunities for him. Targets are funneled into the middle of this defense because you got Surtain on the outside. I love reuniting him with Dre Greenlaw where they have that communication in that hook zone area of the field. They've done that together. So love that signing. Broncos killed it, man. The only thing about this offseason for them is all of these moves are injury noted signings. Evan Ingram, injury-plagued season last year. Dre Greenlaw, injured dude. Hufanga, in large part because of his play style, has a hard time staying on the field. So there's a world where we look back on this and they just didn't get these guys on the field. There's a risk element there. We know Sean Payton is a risky team builder by his philosophy. So that's the only note on this. It's the only reason this isn't an A+ or an A, because these guys were available for a reason. But I do like their offseason quite a bit. I gave this a B+. And the last thing I wanted to say that was in my notes that I forgot to mention is I think the way that they're operating here is just even more confirmation that their line play is extremely underrated, and they are very happy with where they're at on their offensive line and their defensive line. All they did was, extend DJ Jones, right? Make sure they have the same guys back. And I like it, man. I think Denver's setting up. How quickly this roster has come on, this is exactly why you trade a first-round pick for Sean Payton. He's setting this team up really well. I'm liking where the Broncos are at, man. I am. So a B+ for their free agency. Okay, all we have left is the AFC North, a division that frankly hasn't had the opportunity to make a ton of moves. So this division is going to go a little bit quicker, but the Baltimore Ravens, so they signed DeAndre Hopkins to a 1-year, $5 million deal. That's where we're at with DeAndre Hopkins on his market. It's been a steep fall off from 2023 where he played pretty well for the Titans, frankly. Forgive me, I'm going to have a quick sip of this Diet Coke. But really, the only other moves they made on the offensive line, they lose Patrick McCarry, but they get Ronnie Stanley back. That was a big one, right? That's their big free agent signing, is to retain Ronnie Stanley, not have to go in the draft basically praying that they can get Josh Connerly before the Chiefs go get him. It's a huge deal for the Ravens to get Stanley back. And cheap, right? Less than Dan Moore Jr. got. It's pretty crazy. He wanted to come back. It's a huge win for the Ravens. Beyond that, Cooper Rush, backup quarterback, gets brought in here. And then the defense has been mostly untouched so far, and they have lost a lot of pieces that played last year, right? Brandon Stevens, Marcus Williams. Ravens fans will tell you they're not going to miss those guys too much. But Michael Pierce retires. They lose Malik Harrison to the Steelers. And their special teams ace, Chris Board, leaves as well. But, yeah, not a ton to talk about here. I feel like I already mentioned Ronnie Stanley there. It's just absolute slam dunk to get him back. Hopefully he can continue to stay healthy as he did last year. DeAndre Hopkins, kind of whatever to me. I have a minor take on this, and that's that I'm a little worried that he's going to be a little bit of a loud, kind of unproductive wide receiver 3 for them. I don't know that DeAndre Hopkins is necessarily ready to come in and not get targeted that much, which is what's going to happen here, because Bateman played really well down the stretch last year. But it's a minor concern. It's not going to be anything that makes me feel less about the Ravens or anything like that. But, the market tells you where we're at with Hopkins. He's a 33-year-old wide receiver 3. It's nice to have him. I just hope he is cool with being in that role. He's been a guy that he's kind of infamous for not wanting to practice a whole lot. I think that's a big reason why it didn't work out in Kansas City last year, especially coming in mid-season. Like, if you're going to come in mid-season, you got to practice. I don't know how much he was doing that. So, I don't know. Just something to monitor. Fine enough signing, though, for a 1-year, $5 million deal. Why not? And then the Cooper Rush signing is at least a testament to kind of how far this offense has come. Think of all the years where their backups were, Tyler Huntley and the Oregon QB, and they had RG3 for a while. Like, they felt like if Lamar went down, their offensive infrastructure was to be designed around the QB run game and play action and kind of do the gimmick offense thing. Well, not anymore. Like, Lamar has evolved so much. This offense has evolved so much that they're a full-scale NFL passing game, baby. So they can go get a Cooper Rush to be a good backup quarterback. They can actually step in and run an offense. Not that Tyler Huntley wasn't that, but a lot of these other guys weren't. If Lamar is going to deal with an injury, Cooper Rush could keep this team afloat for sure. He played solid for Dallas last year. He really did. So for Baltimore, I didn't even really feel comfortable giving them a grade. It's almost a TBD for me because for me, I think them losing all these defensive pieces, I think they're going to see how the draft goes and then come back and bargain, go look at the bargain bin and fill out some spots in their defense, as the Ravens love to do. But I mean, call it a B, call it an NA, call it a TBD. There's just not a ton to really grade for the Ravens so far. So let's go ahead and move forward to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they have been pretty busy. At quarterback, they are awaiting word on Aaron Rodgers, and ultimately the grade is going to, change based on what Rodgers does. But they do bring Mason Rudolph back from Tennessee. And then at wide receiver, obviously, they make the big splash for DK Metcalf. But under the radar of the DK Metcalf signing, they get Ben Skoranek here. I'll talk about that in Arthur Smith's offense. Offensive line really just lost Dan Moore. At running back, they lose Najee Harris, and Jalen Warren is on a second-round restricted free agent tender, so they really did not want to lose him. On defense, Ogunjobi is out. Daniel Ekwale is in. At linebacker, they go get Malik Harrison from the Ravens. And then in the secondary, they lose Dante Jackson, but sign Darius Slay, coming cross-state from Philadelphia. And they also picked up Brandon Echols, a speedy backup from the Jets. So obviously the DK Metcalf move is a big one that we can talk about again here. So kind of like three main opinions on this. Number one, it's a lot to give up a second-round pick to give him all that money, but I don't hate it. Like, DK Metcalf is sweet. So, like, if I'm a Steelers fan, am I going to be sit here nitpicking, oh, I wish it was a third-rounder over a second-rounder, and I wish we gave him $3 million less? Probably not. Like, at the end of the day, I think it's a good move. He's got some frustrating moments. You got to acknowledge that. You got to put the right players around him to compensate for what he doesn't do well. But he's a unique piece to have on your offense, right? And I can picture him in that Steelers jersey working out. So that was the first piece. Second piece is I like this move even more if they do bring it home with Aaron Rodgers. Let me circle back to that point in a second. And then the third thing that I thought about with this move is George Pickens not their guy long term. Pickens has had some off-field drama in terms of just his personality. It's just kind of all over the place, right? And I wonder if they look at Metcalf as a similar role, ex-wide receiver, runs a lot of similar routes, wins a lot of the same ways. Maybe they think they could get that pick back in a George Pickens trade at some point. It's just a thought. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but it would surprise me a little bit if an NFL team wanted to give what will probably end up being about $70 million almost per year to DK Metcalf and George Pickens. It's just a little bit redundant. Doesn't have to be totally redundant. Those guys can coexist. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if it does happen, I'm just saying that was one of my thoughts when they acquired Metcalf. So those are kind of my three main thoughts, takes, whatever, on the DK Metcalf signing. Now, let's piggyback that off into the Aaron Rodgers conversation because, yeah, the Vikings are getting involved here. I've had some tweets about that. The Giants want Aaron Rodgers. I still think Pittsburgh is very likely the Aaron Rodgers landing spot here. And I actually really like Rodgers' skill set for what he is right now in this offense with DK Metcalf and George Pickens, right? Because Rodgers has talked about wanting to be in a more run-forward offense. They're going to do that. The offensive line is going to be better. They're getting guys back healthy next year. And, Jaylen Warren is just a better fit for a wide zone running game. I wouldn't be surprised if they draft a guy at some point to bring someone else in here, but they want to run the ball. And Aaron Rodgers, when he throws the ball, he wants to push the ball outside the numbers. And what a perfect duo for Aaron Rodgers to get to work with in DK Metcalf. Like, the last time he had someone like DK Metcalf was Jordy Nelson. True vertical threat, someone that if you want to press this guy with Aaron Rodgers throwing the goal ball, now he can't quite throw it as accurately as he used to be, but he can still hit it. That is a perfect combination. And then you have George Pickens with the back shoulders and the trust balls. Like, there's a lot of potential there for those two guys to pick you apart on the outside. And then the other thing I like about this is you do have Pat Freiermuth. You do have, you got Austin, who in this situation is probably gonna have to play a little bit from the slot, which is fine. I think he can do that. But Roman Wilson, who my pro comp was Randall Cobb, ironically, hopefully can get more implemented as a more of a third down slot option for them. I think they're, as much as Rodgers doesn't love attacking the middle of the field, I do think off of play action in Arthur Smith's offense, I think Rodgers could get back doing a little bit of that like he did with Matt LaFleur. He was very good at it. And he doesn't have to be all the way bought in to that style of offense. If he is, that's great. But I think he can run the early down stuff. I think it's a healthy, where I'm getting at with this is it's a healthy situation where there can be a little bit of a middle ground. Tomlin can, and a middle ground on what we've talked about with Rodgers, where wherever he goes, he's got to swallow his pride to a degree. He's got to acclimate to a culture and run have a play caller that's going to scheme stuff open for him. And you're only hopeful that with what he experienced with the Jets, trying to do everything for himself, he looks at what happened in Green Bay with Matt LaFleur and said, you know what, that was actually kind of nice. I would like at least a little bit of that back. And I do think this is a situation where you can go with Arthur Smith, very similar offense to what Matt LaFleur wanted to run in Green Bay. And this can be a situation where it's, okay, actually pretty straightforward. First and second down, Mike Tomlin would have to kind of be in the room and plant the flag on this, but it's like, okay, Aaron, first and second down, you don't get to change the play. Arthur Smith's going to call what we're going to call. You're not going to change it. We might call you an RPO and you can make a decision off of that, but you're not changing the play on first and second down. Third down, we will let you do what you got to do. Third down, you're going to have Pickens and you're going to have Metcalf. We're going to give you some of these intermediate options. We're going to call play. If you got to change it, if you got to make your checks, fine. We can work with that. Hopefully have a great defense. And I actually could see this working. I'm not saying they're going to win a Super Bowl, but could they be a highly competitive team? Rodgers plays at a pretty high level, rolls off into the sunset, and Pittsburgh's able to kind of keep doing what they want to do, stay competitive. I like this fit, especially after they got DK Metcalf. So still expecting Rodgers to sign here. That's why I wanted to spend so much time on it. And I'm glad it's kind of on the record now, because after we do these free agent videos, we are very much focused on the draft. So wanted to kind of put that down there so it's on the record for if and when it happens. And you guys can come back and revisit it if you need to. But Steelers did do some more things. I actually love the Ben Skoranek signing here. Like, man, you talk about Arthur Smith wanting blockers out there. Ben Skoranek is one of the best blocking wide receivers in the league. He was damn near a fullback for the Rams just a couple years ago. Now he's bounced around. Teams haven't quite found the right fit, but this is actually a really good signing for the Steelers for what he is. You see wide receiver and you want some dynamic playmaker. That's not what he is. He can make contested catches. He can do some stuff in the receiving game, but dude, Ben Skoranek, he's probably going to be third in total snaps played for wide receivers for this team, even ahead of Roman Wilson, ahead of Calvin Austin. Now, you'll take him off the field for those Aaron Rodgers third downs, but you now have here in Pittsburgh a really dynamic group of blocking players and an offensive line that I like for next year, man. I mean, Broderick Jones got to figure it out, but you hope he can. You got Sam All, who's the vet. You got Frazier, who was awesome as a rookie. You got Mason McCormick in year 2, freaky blocker. And Troy Fatanu coming back. First round. They basically get an extra first round pick this year because Troy Fatanu didn't play. Like, that offensive line, I think, will play better next year. And then you got Pat Freiermuth. You got Darnell Washington, who emerged as a freaky blocker last year. You got Connor Hayward, who's a really nice fullback tight end piece. You've got now Ben Skoranek, who's an awesome blocker from the slot, and a running back that is a better fit for their system. You got Kenneth Gainwell brought in as well, by the way. I forgot to mention him. I do still like Kenneth Gainwell, but they're gonna smash you with play action and wide zone run game. This is a Arthur Smith offense through and through. So I don't know. I'm kind of optimistic about this Steelers offense, man. I think it all makes sense to me, and I think Rodgers on top of that's the ideal piece. It just comes down to if he decides to go there. As far as the defense, they didn't do a ton. I'm excited that Ogunjobi's gone. I am, because I think it's time for Benton to get that full-time playing time. Benton did start over Ogunjobi last year, but he played 670 snaps to Larry Ogunjobi's 550. I think we'll get another 200 snaps from Benton, and he can really break out next year. So I don't think you're going to miss Ogunjobi all that much. They still have Montravius Adams, who's a fine player. They bring in Daniel Ekwale, who can do some stuff in a rotation. So I'm excited for that. And then I did actually really like the Malik Harrison signing for them, because they lost. We just had him for the Raiders, who we were just talking about. Goodness. Landon Roberts. They lost to Landon Roberts, who the Steelers had this LB by committee last year, where Roberts would play early downs, and then they would take him off the field and put their rookie linebacker out of NC State, Peyton Wilson, out there as a coverage player. So I love Malik Harrison in that role. And then additionally, if you want to start to give Peyton Wilson more snaps for early down work to hopefully develop him into more of a 3-down player, because he does have the potential for that, you can actually take Malik Harrison and use him in the exact role that they had for Preston Smith last year. Malik Harrison can thump and play middle linebacker, but he can also come up on the line and play that good run defense as an on-ball edge player like Preston Smith. So he's going to get, I think, a decent amount of playing time wearing a couple different hats. It's just a really smart deal. And you pluck him from Baltimore. I love that. I love that move. I think he's going to be good for the Steelers. That would be a move if I was a Ravens fan. I'd be like, man, why did he have to go to Pittsburgh? Like, I'm not going to miss him too much, but why does he got to go to Pittsburgh? Like, he's probably going to make some really annoying plays against the Ravens next year. And then I love upgrading at corner with Darius Slay. I mean, let me put it this way. Dante Jackson is a better fit in the Chargers system as an off-zone corner where he can use his speed and closing ability to just try and make plays. In Pittsburgh, he can't do everything they want. They do run a lot of off-zone, a lot of fire zone, cover 3 type of stuff, but they love cover 2, and Dante Jackson's not a great cover 2 corner. He just doesn't have the length to be that press player. Darius Slay can do that, but he can play off-zone. He can play man-to-man. He just gives you a much more versatile piece opposite of Joey Porter, and I really like that. He's a great mentor for Joey Porter as well, so really good signing. I think Darius Slay can still play. I do. And then Brandon Echols is a nice little signing too. They still could use some investments at corner though, don't get me wrong. But I like what the Pittsburgh Steelers did, man. This to me is if they sign Aaron Rodgers, I understand the negative press that goes with him. I really think Pittsburgh's a team that can kind of reduce the annoying aspects of Aaron Rodgers, the ego stuff, reduce that down, boil it down to just him playing quarterback for you. I think it's a really good fit. So if they do land Aaron Rodgers, this is an A- offseason. I really like what the Steelers have done. If they don't, well, giving all that up for DK Metcalf, if they don't get Rodgers, they're kind of left throwing their hands up. So for me, if they don't land Rodgers, it's more of like a C- D+ offseason because they burn the bridge with Russ. Fields isn't an option anymore. What else is left? Do you make a desperation play for Kirk Cousins? Like, that's not going to work. You give Ryan Tannehill a call, maybe. See if he wants to reunite with Arthur Smith. I mean, I don't hate that, I guess. But this offseason really is determined on the Vikings not being interested in Aaron Rodgers. Because if they don't, this all of a sudden becomes probably the top most likely team to go be a player for Shedeur Sanders. Now, I do think Shedeur can run this offense. I do. I don't love Shedeur's skill set with DK Metcalf and George Pickens because he's just not a good vertical ball thrower. But he can run Arthur Smith's system. But things do get much more complicated if they don't bring home Aaron Rodgers at this point. So that's your Steelers breakdown. Then we got the Browns. We knew they weren't going to be very busy, and they weren't. But they go trade for Kenny Pickett. They have not brought Nick Chubb back yet. I don't know. I don't think that was expected, but really no move at running back, no move at wide receiver. On the offensive line, they did sign Cornelius Lucas to a 2-year, $6.5 million deal. On the defensive line, that's really where they were busy. Obviously, they bring Myles Garrett back. That's their big move of the offseason, making him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league until Jamar Chase happened a couple weeks later. But they released Dalvin Tomlinson. They signed Malik Collins and Joe Tryon. So very busy on the D-line. They bring Devin Bush back, and then they released safety Juan Thornhill. So I guess we'll talk about them bringing Myles Garrett back. I will just say, like, props to them for working it out. Money talks, I'll say that. More of a comment than a take here, but this signing was a total fuck you to the rest of the NFL in two ways. Number one, it's a fuck you in the sense of like, no, Myles Garrett's ours. You don't get Myles Garrett. So an F you in that sense to teams like the Eagles or Bills or Commanders or whoever was making calls about Garrett. But even more of an F you, escalating the non-quarterback market by $5 million. Like, this was a huge jump from Justin Jefferson to this. It was an FU to the Bengals, who had to match this on Jamar Chase's contract. And NFL teams just aren't going to like that, right? When you are so desperate that the only way that you can keep Myles Garrett is to give him $5 million more per year than anybody else was going to give him. It's when he's already under contract for you, by the way. Like, it's just an FU. Like, wow, you are so incompetent that you're screwing the rest of us over. Thank you. So the league is not going to like that. Not that that really means anything, but I do think that's funny. But a props to Cleveland for working it out. Franchise player, making a lot of noise. Obviously, if this team is going to compete, which is a big if Stefanski and maybe Andrew Berry were going to save their jobs. Shout out Matthew Berry, by the way, who almost snuck into the pod there by accident. Legend in the football analysis world. But anyway, if there's any world where the Browns compete next year, it's probably with Myles Garrett and that defense getting back to 2023 form, which is not impossible, right? But, man, that's a lot of money. And I do have to at least beg the question, would they have been better actually trading him? Because he's, 29 years old? You could have gotten... You could have really made a decision. He'll turn 30 this year. And you probably could have gotten a pair of first-round picks and some. I mean, if you're being realistic about the Cleveland Browns, like, I get it. They built this team to win this season. It didn't work out. It just didn't. I think it's worth begging the question, like, should this team have hit rock bottom and looked towards 2027? in a total rebuild type of situation, knowing that you do have the second round pick. You can get an Abdul Carter and, at least replace that elite edge rush piece, use the other picks, the cap space to move forward with a new version of this team. Now, it's hard to do that when you're Barry and Stefanski, knowing you're not going to be coaching the 2027 Browns. So if they were going to go that route, if that route was ever going to make sense, then ownership probably should have relieved Stefanski and Barry of their duties, even if it's not even fully their fault, when ownership stepped in and caused this whole Deshaun Watson mess to begin with. So it is just a disaster in Cleveland. And that's why it's hard to have really too many takes about it, right? Because the best thing for the future of this team was probably to trade Garrett, but the coach and the GM don't want to do that. And they're there, and they're in this situation because the ownership's such a disaster. So it's just a big mess. But congrats to them on working something out so that you didn't end up with this nightmare situation where he's holding out and not playing for you, and you literally can't trade him because you'd have to cut half the team just to eat the cap space on his contract that it would incur on you if you did trade him. But I don't know. A lot of different directions you can take the Myles Garrett conversation, but let's see. Any other takeaways from the Browns free agency? I think the Kenny Pickett move is interesting. I would not be surprised if Kenny Pickett is their starting quarterback next year. I wouldn't. I don't know. I want to be careful with this because I don't think Kenny Pickett is a good quarterback, but I did have the take that the Steelers kind of did Kenny Pickett wrong in the way that they really kind of forced him out of town. He had a horrible offensive coordinator. They finally fire the coordinator. He plays some of his best ball in Pittsburgh, then gets hurt, and then they never give him the job back. They start Mason Rudolph in a playoff game, and he looked like Mason Rudolph starting in a playoff game. So I don't want to say anything crazy about Kenny Pickett, but I don't think it's the most irrational thing ever if Cleveland wanted to start him next year, given the situation that they're in. Is it ideal? No. I would love for them to be able to take on Kirk Cousins, but I just don't know if that's logical for either party from a cap perspective. But it is interesting that he could be starting. It just depends how they feel about Shedeur. It really just comes down to that. As far as the defensive line moves, it's kind of a push for me. I think Dalvin Tomlinson's the better player between him, Malik Collins, and Joe Tryon. But you get two instead of one. You get Malik Collins, who's a disruptive pass rusher, gives you a little bit more from the interior there. And Joe Tryon. I think their pass rush got better. Their run defense got worse. So take that for what it is. I like getting Devin Bush back on the cheap. You're probably happy that nobody gave him big money. He's a great backup for JOK. Very similar skill set, just turn the knobs down a little bit. And he looked good in that role last year where they let him just kind of fly around and use your athleticism. And, they released Juan Thornhill. So right now it's looking like their starting safety is going to be Ronnie Hickman, undrafted free agent out of Ohio State. Good for him. But I went with a B- on the Browns. I think we're good to move on. Like, it's one of those teams where it's like the grade is the grade. They're in a tough spot. It was going to be tough for them to do anything much higher than a B-, I think. But they're trying to whittle their way through this, man. But our final team here, the Cincinnati Bengals, who were busy today. Big news today. They get Chase and T back on monster deals. Although monster on Jamar Chase, T. Higgins wasn't monster. I actually, 4 years, $115 million on T. Not so bad. Not so bad. Under $30 million for, I think T. Higgins is a better player than DK Metcalf. And you get him without having to give up the second round pick, well, because he's on your team, but you get him for $5 million a year less. I think that's good. And it could be that his games missed is factored in on that a little bit. That they're saying, hey, if you miss 4 games a year, we got to account for that. So that could be factored in there a little bit, but I think getting him back and then, Jamar Chase, like obviously they had to pay what they had to pay. And I think why this took so long is they probably were super close to getting it done. And then the Browns came in with the Myles Garrett thing. And then Jamar Chase and his agent were like, we can get another $5 million. Let's go. And that's exactly what happened. That's why it took longer. But man, shame on the Bengals for taking this long to get this done. Like, seriously, dude. At any point during the season, after the season, this should have been taken care of. And it ended up costing them. They were slow on it. And it cost them not going to break their back or anything like that, but it's another starter that they are not going to be able to afford because of the Jamar Chase contract. So they get it done. Good on the Bengals. Ultimately, the idea of losing T. Higgins and Jamar Chase was kind of ridiculous to me. You see teams like the Chiefs and the Eagles and the Niners able to pay all these guys. You look at the Bengals, it's like, who the hell are you paying other than Joe Burrow? Right? Like, they're not even paying Trey Hendrickson that much. Like, the thought of them losing those pieces, it just was mind-blowing. And it's a shame on the Bengals for their ownership, and we've had this rant before. They just don't get involved with void years and cap manipulation. They shoot themselves in the foot by having a tiny front office with like 5 employees and not adapting. Like, it's just a bummer. It's just a bummer. We've had that rant before, but ultimately, they get it done. You head into next year focused. You got the band back together. T's healthy. Chase is healthy. They both played phenomenal last year. Burrow played phenomenal. Like, rock and roll. Now they can focus on doing what they can with this defense. I think they're going to have a little bit of wiggle room here to at least add some pieces. They've got to bargain hunt and do some stuff here. I could be wrong about that. We're still waiting on all the details and stuff, but, I don't think the Bengals offseason is done. I think it's more just getting started now that they got T and Chase locked up. The next domino, though, of course, is Trey Hendrickson, and I'm glad we did the Bengals last year because they are just a uniquely structured conversation. Their offseason started today. Now they have to figure out, with the cap space they have left, which I do like. Let's see if it's updated. I'm just pulling this up right now. Over the cap has them at $26 million. That sounds about right to me after the deals. That sounds about right to me. They theoretically could figure it out with Trey Hendrickson, but they probably won't because they don't do the thing with the, void years and all that stuff. Maybe they could make a one-time exception for Trey Hendrickson, give him a 3-year, $90 million deal, structure it a little bit different. Like, that's what they should do, but will they? Will they? That's the question. That's going to be the next domino. Now, they could very well flip him for a second-round pick. It sounds like they've been asking for a first. I think that was a placeholder so that he didn't find a trade before they got Higgins and Chase done, because now that they got that done, they want to now focus on Hendrickson. It was more of like, we're asking for a first, and if someone threw him a first, they'd be like, yeah, we'll take it. But now they'll be a little more realistic. They'll ask for a second or a combo platter of picks or a third and a player or something like that. But like, that's going to be the next domino to fall. I wouldn't be surprised if they get him back. Wouldn't be surprised if they trade him. But either way, that's going to be the next thing they got to take care of. And then, if we want to react to the moves that they have made, they extended BJ Hill. I'm glad they got that done. That's a great deal. It is. BJ Hill back for 3 years, $33 million. Totally fine deal. I actually love the Oren Burks signing. I know it's looks like nothing, but Oren Burks has played great in the last 2 years. He was a godsend for the Eagles in their Super Bowl run when oh my gosh, we're reaching the point where I'm struggling to think of names, but the Georgia linebacker for the Eagles went down. Oren Burks stepped in, played unbelievable. He was so good in those playoff games. And the Bengals are betting on a guy that has freaky traits, that's had to learn this position. He's bounced around the league. 2 years, $5 million deal. Like, they're hoping he can be their Zach Bond sneaky find, putting him next to Logan Wilson. He's going to be on watch for them next year. We'll see how that goes. They bring Samaje Perine back. That makes sense. Get more of a pass blocker if you need it, because as good as Chase Brown is, he's not a pass blocker. So, Perine as a third down back in certain packages makes a lot of sense. And then they get Joseph Asai back, 1 year, $7 million. That's fine. He's a young player. Maybe you get some growth from him. But, either they bring Hendrickson back and you hope, different situation. You hope that, your Dax Hill can get back healthy at corner. Showed a lot of promise there, and just don't be quite as bad as you were last year with Trey Hendrickson. Or you ship off Hendrickson, you use that cap space to move, bring in some more free agents, get that extra draft capital, get a little bit younger. They got a couple options there, but they're trying to thread a needle here. They make things harder on themselves because they're the Bengals, but it's probably a feel-good day in Cincinnati to just have those contracts taken care of, and now you know what's next. But for me, the Bengals get a C+ because they messed around with this Chase Higgins situation so much that they have hampered their ability to be open in the market and get much better this offseason. So I went C+ on the Bengals offseason so far. That was a banger. Hope you guys enjoyed. We're doing NFC tomorrow, so buckle up. It's going to be another long episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm going to be on my way, start getting my notes ready for that show. I just want to ask you guys, make sure you are subscribed to the Fully Inflated Football podcast, because not all of these shows will be posted. Tomorrow's will be posted on the main channel, but they won't always be on the main channel. Some of them are posted on the Fully Inflated Football podcast YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to that or the podcast wherever you get your audio feeds. But either way, I'm out of here. Thank you guys, and we'll see you later.